to start 9 sharp. Hope you had some time yesterday evening during the icebreaker and maybe even overnight to think about what we've discussed tomorrow. This morning, as Anke anticipated, we will have full morning dedicated to almost full morning dedicated to calibration validation, and then also a very important session on open science, including let's say all aspects of that in a very holistic let's say meaning. So I'm very pleased to have here Emiliano Carmona from DLR and Roberto Colombro from University of Milano Bicocca chairing this first part of the CalVal session. So thank you very much and wish you another pleasant and interesting day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marco. Welcome to everybody. So we can start with the first session of CalVal. So the first speaker is Eyal Bendor, and this is a transversal, I would say, presentation that is related to a novel approach for cross-calibration of field spectrometers in the context of CalVal activities. So, Eyal,
thank you, Roberto. The floor is yours. Thank you, everybody. Harmonization, ground truth measurement. This is the topic of my presentation. I would like to acknowledge the co-authors of this talk. And I will go right away to the introduction. First of all, the organizer asked us to answer some questions, key questions, and I hope that after this presentation we will be able to answer some of them. In many ways, we are seeking to measure the surface. And in soil spectroscopy, we are taking soil to the laboratory and then measure them spectrally, and we assume that this is the spectral information that the satellite sees or remote sensing means sees. But this is not the case. As you see, this is the same soil, and we have a crust, and the crust shows different spectral information than the soil after we mix the soil or bringing it to the laboratory. But the same thing is for the CalVal. We have to measure the CalVal in a very precise way, and also we have to measure the CalVal information from many sites global-wide in a way that we can harmonize this information together. And this information can be harmonized only if we are taking a very good steps to do that, because each spectrometer can be deteriorated by time, and from time to time, if you are using different spectrometer, different protocol, you will get different results. So this is the problem that we found out that is actually the same for soil spectroscopy and the same for CalVal information. So what is the solution? Is harmonization. And what we do is actually asking to do some ISO protocol in order to get very precise surface reflectance that will be harmonized between users all over the world. And the goal was to combine measurement from the same and different users, to harmonize different spectrometers from different locations, and to obtain laboratory quality spectra in the field condition. We inspire from the standard protocol that we developed for soil spectroscopy. For many years, we had soil spectral libraries for many places around the world, and we cannot harmonize them because each of them were using different protocol. And in order to make them harmonize, we developed a method that we call it ISS, Internal Soil Standard. As you see here, we need to increase the precision and we increase the accuracy. And this information, this standard is in the red, and we need to all the time to actually define the spectral information that is close to this red. We take the sample and we say the sample is in mother spectrometer, in mother laboratory, and we all define our spectral measurement to this spectral internal soil spectral information. So we select some laboratory. This is something that we do. We select spectral laboratory on spectrometer, and we all the time align our spectrometer, our measurement, even though we are not at the same place, to this spectral ISS information, which we declare to be the best or the mother spectrum. Okay. So this is, we already have a protocol for that, and we have an ISS, internal soil standard, that we found in southern Australia, and we disseminate this material, this soil to everybody, and everybody is actually doing the alignment with this soil measurement. This is just to show you that after we do the alignment, the spectral information is actually much more aligned to the ISS that measure at the mother laboratory or spectrometer. There are some papers, I count 22 papers that already use this protocol, and they are very successful, and this protocol is really, really helping us to harmonize all spectral information data from all over the world. I know there are 4 more papers in a line, but this is a very nice, let's say, outreach to show that this is working protocol. And now we'll go to the field. As I said, we inspire from this activity, and we developed what we call soil probe. The soil probe actually has the same geometry of the contact probe, as you see, but the nice thing about that it has a field of view of what you see from 1.5 meter with bare fiber, but we don't actually demolish the soil surface by this soil probe. So it's a closed chamber, and we have artificial light, and we get information no matter what time we are doing it. If we have cloud, if we have also bad atmosphere. So this apparatus is nicely working, and we already tested. And as you can see in this slide, if you measure the white reference after 6 hours using this apparatus, we can see that the 100% reflectance is not changing. It's very stable. The other are changing by the atmosphere, by the protocol, by the user. So this is very stable, and everybody can use it without any problem, and we don't have to be expert because the geometry is also fixed, and we are not leaning on the atmosphere. So we can also measure here absolute reflectance as well. So what we do is taking, the idea is that we cannot take the Lucky Bay, the internal soil sample that we measure at Australia to everybody. I send this sample to everybody, 4 gram, 2 gram, but for the field we need to have 5 kilo, 10 kilo. We cannot carry it, it's not possible. So I suggested, the idea was to take sand that you have at your hand and make a transfer correlation to the Lucky Bay at the laboratory. And using this transfer function, you can go to the field, and you have now ISS in the field, ISS that made from your sand, but it is actually aligned to the laboratory. And what you do is measure the sand in the field with the soil probe, and you also have this function to correct it to the laboratory. And in the end, what we have is 2 different spectral information of the same target, but using the ISS for the field, we get them align each other. So this is harmonization way to do it in the field. In order to check this hypothesis, what we did, we take 6 spectrometer, different spectrometer, ASD, spectral evolution, and also 6 soil samples, and we send them to 6 laboratories, and each laboratory were using different soil probe. And what we send them, we send 6 soil samples. As you see here, the soil attributes of the soil samples. They are varied, and they are very nicely representing arid and semi-arid soils. And And what we get actually from the 6 laboratory, on the left-hand side, you see what we get in the laboratory without correction to the internal soil standard. On the right-hand side, you see what we get once we correct it to the internal soil standard in order to do harmonization. On the bottom, what you see is the soil pro measurement. But the soil pro measurement is far from laboratory. And the question if we can make them together by using this internal soil standard that is selected for the field. This is to show one soil sample, sand. As you see on the left-hand side, you see the Lucky Bay, and on the right-hand side, the soil pro without correction. And on the bottom, you see the soil, the sand after correction to the internal standard. So just to show that it is very nicely corrected, not only for one soil, here is some measure. It's the green. The measure of the green is the corrected, and the measure of the blue is not corrected. And if the value is very low, it means that the correction was okay. So you see that after the ISS sand in the field, we corrected all spectra very nicely to match with the laboratory. So now going to the field, we have a CalVal site in my country, in Israel, and we are doing the CalVal for MMAP. And on the left-hand side, you see the soil pro measured, and the right-hand side, you see the bare fiber measuring the area, and you see the standard deviation of the soil pro is a little bit lower than the right-hand side. So this is the precision, actually, and it's very nicely showing that we can see, first of all, we are not leaning on clouds. We can measure really fast, and we can measure lots of sample in a very short time. And also we can get information about the humidity, the moisture, and we are not leaning on the atmosphere. So we can use this for doing absolute reflectance as well. On the left-hand side, you see 2 years of measuring the sample in the area that we are doing the CalVal. You see on the left-hand side, you see that we measure with Soil Pro after the correction, after the calibration. On the right-hand side, we see the bare fiber without any correction. So you see the difference. I cannot, the picture shows very nicely the results, the idea. And what we are doing actually is now we have the red, which is the sand, and we are correcting this sand to the laboratory, and we claim that this sand is the perfect reflectance for ourselves. And because we are using Lucky Bay for the internal soil standard in laboratory all over the world, you can always correct your sand to this Lucky Bay, and by that we can harmonize even the field globally. And in the end, what we get, the ISSF for the field, and this paper, or the results also, if you are interested, can be seen by this paper that we published. So the conclusion is that the Soil Pro is reliable and easy assembly. It can be aligned to lab spectral information, which is very important for soil, and I think also for CalVal. The Soil Pro preserves soil, earth, surface, and the harmonized Soil Pro is a novel method, I think. I didn't see anything that can make harmonization of absolute reflectance in this direction. And if we are looking on the key questions that brought up by the organizers, I think we can answer most of the questions by using this Soil Pro, because the short of time, the lack of time, I will not go through, but this presentation will be available to everybody. So you can browse and see what were the answers to our questions, and I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Then we move to the next talk. There will be time for questions at the end of the second session. Next speaker is Miguel Pato from the German Aerospace Center, and he will talk about the MMAP in-orbit calibration and harmonization of products.
Okay, good morning. So my name is Miguel Pato, and I'll be talking about NMAP, and in particular, some of the lessons that we think we have learned in these couple of years in space. Sorry? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. So my name is Miguel Pato. I'll be talking about Nmap and some of the lessons we think we have learned in the last couple of years. And this is work done in collaboration really with every team member of the Nmap ground segment processing and calibration team. So Nmap consists of two separate spectrometers covering the spectral range from 420 to 2,500 nanometers with 224 bands with a very high spectral stability and accuracy, small spectral smile, and the radiometric stability better than 2.5%. I leave there many other specifications of Nmap. If you are interested, you can also go to the website for more detailed information, and I encourage you to do so. But the way these specifications are kept is with a rather extensive suite of in-orbit mechanisms. We have LAMP, sun, spectral, linearity, and deep space calibrations in orbit, as well as dark frames before and after each data take. Yesterday, we had a talk by Laura Laporte about the status of the Nmap mission. So here, I'll just say a couple of words. We launched in April 2022. We became operational in November of the same year. And the status as of today is that all instruments are in very good health. All systems are nominal. 2024 was a very good year for acquisition of data in Nmap. We acquired more data than in previous years. And we just did some weeks ago the milestone of 100,000 products on our catalog. And we also completed our second year in operations. Elsewhere in this workshop, there are dedicated Nmap talks or posters. We had yesterday mission status and foreground mission. After my talk, there will also be talks about product validation and open science by Nmap colleagues. So you have more information there. In this talk, I will focus on the processing and calibration only. This is just one of three systems in the ground segment. And the processor and calibration team is really responsible for the performance of in-flight calibration, which leads eventually to the update of calibration tables, which in turn get used in our complex processing chain that is under continuous development, or improvement. That's a key point that I'll come back to in a couple of slides. And this processing chain delivers the products that are generated for the user. So L1P, L1C, and L2A products, which have rich metadata information about quality control and instrument monitoring. What I'll do until the end of the talk is basically to pick some selected highlights of the Nmap mission since its launch. And I'll cover very shortly calibration, processing, data quality, as well as instrument monitoring. I'll start with calibration. So here one highlight has really been that we have managed to do a continuous monitoring of the sensor performance with the help of all these calibration mechanisms in orbit and regular calibrations. Maybe some of you remember that in the beginning of the mission, we had this fast near sensor degradation in the first year that has since slowed down, still with some differences across the focal plane. But the key point is that with all these calibration mechanisms, we were able to closely follow the behavior. On the other hand, the sphere sensor has been remarkably stable. Both instruments show very good spectral stability. Also, the dark signal in both instruments is very stable. And currently, we are investigating the mismatch that exists between near and sphere in the overlapping spectral region. So there's always work to do. Next, I go to an example of L1B improvement. Here, with the help of user feedback and also in interactions with the space segment, we uncovered a small inconsistency in the sphere dark signal. We managed to put together a correction based on Earth's dark night scenes that is feasible, it is effective, and improves in the sphere a little bit the striping and also this over dark signal correction. This is almost in place. It should be available to users either this week or the next. So just as an example of an improvement. Next, we have the geometric performance. This is really a big highlight. Since launch, we had suboptimal co-registration errors and geolocation accuracy in the commissioning phase, and through processor updates, as well as geometric calibrations, this has been improved. And since May 2023, so more or less 1.5 years ago, we've had very good geometric performance, with geolocation errors well below 1 pixel and co-registration errors at around 1/10 of a pixel. As you see in the plots to the right, this behavior is very stable over the last quarters, over the last 1.5 years, really. And one point for the users out there is that if you want to enjoy from the best possible geometrical performance for a particular scene of Nmap, you should make sure that the metadata has that archive version bigger than that number, bigger or equal to that number. If that's not the case, you can always go back to the EO web system and reorder the processing of that scene. Next, we have atmospheric correction. Here, the interaction with the users, either from the science segment or out there, has been really instrumental in improving some small inconsistencies in L2A products. Here I have a very short summary of some issues or inconsistencies found on snow spectra, in water spectra. We are also working on some other small issues that usually don't affect the majority of the issues of the users, but it just underlines this concept of continuous improvement of processing. And I think this is a benefit for the users, and they can simply reorder the processing of their own scenes later on to benefit from these improvements. I think this is something that also makes our job a bit more complicated, and maybe also for the users, but in the end, the users benefit from this continuous improvement. I also want to mention that our L2A land products are CO's analysis ready compliant at threshold level, and in essence, that means that both at L0 and LX level, there's a bunch of quality control metadata, flags, masks that the users can use in their analysis directly. Okay, and that brings me to the last of my highlights, which pertains the sun diffuser exposure. So here we monitor the life-limited items all the time, and they are well within planned usage. But last year we noticed that one of these life-limited items, the sun diffuser exposure time, was slightly above the planned usage. It was not critical at all, but it was a little bit above. So we launched an analysis to see what would be the impact of reducing the frequency of sun calibrations here, and eventually the mission board took the decision in April this year of reducing the sun calibration frequency to once every 2 months, so instead of monthly. And this extended the minimum mission lifetime of the mission. So this is important if the mission ever gets extended beyond the 5 years of nominal time. And we keep, of course, the monitoring of all these life-limited items throughout. Okay, and that brings me almost to the end of the talk. So here I try to collect some of the lessons learned, or we think we learned in Nmap in the last 2.5 years in space. I reckon that in this audience there are many veterans of many missions, so maybe some of this is either trivial or simple. But I still want to put it out there to anybody working on upcoming missions. First off, we have the expected unexpected. In our case, was clearly the case of near degradation in the first year. It was unexpected, as said, but we managed, in collaboration with the space segment, to actually monitor it very well along the weeks, months, etc. Okay. Very good. Then we have the second point. So this is something that I think it's really important. So if we want to get the most of, or if we want to get the highest quality products from the instruments we have up there, we really have to go a little bit beyond requirements and keep improving the processing. I think this is a case where good is probably not good enough. Then we have the users, both in the science segment and out there. They helped us improving small inconsistencies in all levels of the products. Next, we have the moon. The moon is really a valuable calibration target. So for missions out there, I think you should consider putting it from the beginning of the mission in the design phase, if possible. Then we spent a little bit of time in handling anomalies, small anomalies that do not necessarily have effects on data, but we still want to be sure that that is the case. That has been quite time consuming, but is important. Our continuous instrument monitoring also managed to uncover this small overusage, and we react very quickly, so that's also important. And for this workshop here, really, I think the main message that I want to bring is that not only product harmonization, but also this extensive in-orbit calibration is really key if we ever want to deliver to the users meaningful uncertainties and start comparing products between different missions. And I don't have much more time, so I just leave here the answers to the questions sent by the users, but it will be available for you after the talk. And I just want to thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your presentations, and we can move to Emiliano Carmona, and now we can switch on DESIS rather than NMAP, so about the lesson learned in the last years. So,
okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm going to make, the idea of this talk is to share with you some insights that we have learned using DESIS on the calibration during the last few years that the mission has been operating on the International Space Station, and maybe provide some lessons learned for people that are trying to build, especially a small hyperspectral instruments. DESIS is located on the International Space Station. It's actually the result of the collaboration between Teledyne Brown Engineering and DLR. DLR provides the instrument and the software for data processing, and Teledyne provides the platform where DESIS is installed and the operations. There was a talk yesterday, so I will not go in details. I just want to remind everybody that DESIS operates only on the visible near infrared. It has very fine spectral sampling distance compared with other hyperspectral instruments, 2.55 nanometers. Ground sampling distance is 30 meters and SWOT is 30 kilometers. The instrument has a mass of 93 kilograms, so it's a small size instrument compared with other instruments. Now, concerning the calibration, it is equipped with a calibration board that contains 9 different types of LEDs that can be switched on independently, and we perform 1 calibration measurement per week. And this has been happening for more than, it's almost, yeah, probably more than 6 years now. Below on the left side, you can see the, this doesn't work. You can see the spectra of the LEDs, and in the middle, the illumination in the focal plane. And it is not uniform across track, but still it is good enough to get very accurate measurements of the LEDs. We can compare the shape of the LED for all elements across track and derive very, very small spectral shifts. Actually, with this information, what we found very valuable in data, you can see as a function of time and as a function of these measurements that have been done. I mean, for reference, I started here on January of 2019. What is the spectral shift measured on this spectral calibration? And what we found very early was, a part of some changes on the first 9 months of operation, we saw also these jumps of 0.5 nanometers that produces this distribution where there are like 2 populations. Then we identified that this was related with some temperature gradients on the instrument, and we could correlate the places, the measurements where there was this gradient between the temperature of the optical system and the focal plane with those that the system jumped these 0.5 nanometers. And if you look only to one of these 2 modes, then things are much more stable. We can see now more clearly the change of spectral calibration that happened during the first months of operation, but then since then it has been pretty stable with changes the order of less than around 0.1 nanometer in several years. root mean square of the distribution of these measurements in one of these two modes is, depends on the each LED that is estimated, but it is around 0.1 nanometer. And what we do in our data processing is to correct the difference between these two modes by applying an additional correction step during the SMILE correction. We can also look at the intensity of the measurements that we get from the calibration unit. But then here, what we saw is that all the bands below band 40 saw from the beginning a very fast decrease in performance, similar to what Miguel mentioned about EnMAP in the veneer, but much more drastic and more uniform in the focal plane. So you can see as a function of date how this changed. Above band 40, I would say the change is much minimal, and then it depends on the band. On top of that, in this plot also shows that the LEDs are also changing in intensity. Some went down during this time, others increased slightly. They are light output. So in general, the conclusion was that this was not good enough for radiometric calibration. Also, the data are very noisy, but still, it gives us hints for the radiometry, how it's changing over time. What we do for the radiometric calibration is vicarious calibration. We use essentially uniform scenes that we use for flat fielding the instrument. And then we use RadCalNet measurements to correct the bias. I mean, RadCalNet measurement is only a few tens of pixels in the area where RadCalNet measures or is homogeneous enough. But if we have the instrument very well flat fielded and corrected by RNU using these uniform scenes, then we can use the RadCalNet measurements to calibrate the sensor. What we don't have is evenly distributed data that we use. So we have to adapt to the data which is available, but the only thing we do is we try to acquire RadCalNet as often as possible, but this is, I mean, also the weather or the station is not working, or we cannot make the measurement every opportunity, so we have to work with the data that we have. Still, by comparing with RadCalNet, this is an example when we don't, I mean, each black line corresponds to the ratio of the TOA measured by DESIS and top of atmosphere reflectance measured by RadCalNet, obtained from the bottom of atmosphere measured by RadCalNet and then propagated with our own software to get this finer spectral sampling distance, because if not, the data of RadCalNet is only 10 nanometers. When the data are not calibrated, then there is this bias, which we can see the effect of the decreasing for this period, the effect of the decreasing of the response of the sensor below 500 nanometers. It's very clear there. What we do is to correct the bias, as I said. Once the instrument is flat fielded, then we correct the bias, and we do that for 2 different periods, and then we can manage to get more accurate radiometric response, especially for the ones that change more below 500 nanometers. So from the analysis of this data, what we see is that the instrument below 500 nanometers, as we saw, the response changes a lot. The data don't very well agree with, what we saw from the calibration unit, but then we trust more these measurements. But then above 500, the changes are pretty stable. It shows like 2% difference between above 500 nanometers between 2 consecutive periods on average. And concerning the geometry, it is we obtain automatically extracted ground control points. We get that by comparing with a reference image, and then we do the matching of the images. And when that works, we can achieve below 1 pixel accuracy. So root mean square in X or Y, it's around 20 meters. What we also see is that the bore side angles, which are estimated from these ground control points, this analysis of the ground control points, are stable over time, but they change a lot from one measurement to another. What that means is when we cannot extract ground control points, then we are going to have larger errors, which typically the root mean square is around 300 meters in the cross-track direction, 500 in the along. We suspect it's larger on the along because of the pointing unit that changes the pointing in the along track. Anyway, we don't update this very often because, as you can see, long-term is stable. The latest update was 01 or 1st of March of 2023, but these updates don't help to reduce the error of the non-matching case. Another thing important is that we do this matching image by image, and it can happen in some cases that you have an image, like in this case, it's on water, there is an island, we can find ground control points here, but then in the tile before that, we have only a small corner of land, there are not ground control points, and then we have this error matching one tile with the consecutive one. This is something that you have to be aware of when you work with DESIS data, and there are some metadata information that you can use to recognize that. And then some lessons learned. Probably the most important one is try to build an instrument as stable as possible, but that's obvious. What I want to say is that the vicarious calibration works for a hyperspectral instrument, and it doesn't require a very big effort. However, there are consequences like a delay to have the calibrations installed, and that is challenging for us to keep the users informed when there is an update and when they need to reorder the data. The onboard calibration, I would say, is very recommendable. I mean, even if it is as simple as in the case of DESIS, and in particular with the use of LEDs, I would say it has been very satisfactory for the spectral calibration. It helped us a lot to understand the data. For the radiometric, not so useful. They change a lot. They are not stable, but still, it provides additional information that we can compare with the ground measurements. For the geometry, I mean, the lesson we learned is we should have used all the data take to get the ground control points. The problem is that complicated the analysis a lot, and we wanted to have something very simple for a simple mission like DESIS compared to more complex missions. But this results in this inconsistency between products. And finally, I didn't mention, but DESIS uses a rolling shutter mode, and so far we have not identified that as a problem. And for the questions, yeah, I just leave them here. Yeah, my opinion, it's here, you have the slides, but about the last point, I just want to say about the AI. Personally, maybe I'm old school, I trust more a simple model. I would not like to have to use AI to understand the calibration of my sensor, but it's true that this machine learning can handle large data volumes and complex or non-linear parametrizations. So there are cases that can be an advantage, but I think the best is that you don't have to find yourself in a situation where you really need to go in that direction. The best is if your instrument works better and you don't need to end there. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Emiliano, for this interesting presentation. So now we can move to the next one. Is Fabrizio Niro that is talking about a new concept of Calval activities that is related to the Calval Park. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roberto, and good morning, everyone. I'm Fabrizio Niro. I'm going to talk about the Calval Park project. Let me first thank all my co-authors, which are part of the Calval Park Consortium, which is listed here. So let me start first with motivations. It has been said several times. I'll go very quickly. The proliferation of satellite EO data, need of make them interoperable in order to harness the full potential of this data. Space agencies have addressed this need in the past decades, notably within the CEOS WGCV group, establishing a common infrastructure, reference, size, protocols, and RadCalNet network was just mentioned in the previous talk. Still, we believe there are data gaps, and as a lack of dedicated targets for assessing geometry and image quality, specifically for HR, VHR sensor, and a scarcity of reference data for validating surface reflectance products, and the HYPERNet network is currently filling this gap. And there's also methodological gaps, as synergies across network and site are seldom exploited, and operational network have limited flexibility and scalability, as well as the existing network and site do not strictly follow methodological practices. We started from this, and then we put our objective for the project. We would like to build a new Calval supersize, supporting primarily the Calval needs of optical nearest field sensor, both multi and hyperspectral mission, with a GSD below 30 meters. We like to promote metrological best practice, as well as R&D in Calval, exploiting synergies across networks and site, and ensuring flexibility and scalability of our solution. And we would like to foster collaboration among space agency and commercial data providers. This is the timeline you see in the bottom of the project. It will be developed in 3 consecutive phases. We are now at the design phase, which will be completed by mid next year. And we are currently preparing the ground for the next phase 2 and 3, where we will build the site and operate it. So we designed the site based on the needs of the community. So we reached out the commercial and institutional EO data providers, and this is the list of institutions and commercial data company that we consulted. And based on that, we built our design. In order to do that, we sent a questionnaire to the data providers, and we arranged one-to-one meetings, as well as a user consultation workshop, which was organized last year. Using this, we came up with a summary report, and I have no time, of course, to go through that, but the main takeaways is that the EO community still see a scarcity of ground-based reference data, and in particular for HR, VHR sensor, a lack of MTF and geometry and image quality parameters targets. So based on this survey of needs, we defined the set of measurable CalVal parameters at the site. First one, it will be radiometry, so at level 1. So usually in the RadConnect approach, I mean, we will do spectral and atmospheric measurements over a set of targets, and then using RTM to propagate the signal at top of atmosphere for Vicarious calibration and validation of the radiance. The surface reflectance and atmospheric measurement will be used as well for direct validation of the L2A products. And we will have as well GCP in this region, image quality targets and parameter to validate geometry and image quality parameter. We will also try to measure soil and vegetation biophysical products for validation of higher level products. So let me go to the Calvert Park area and region. So in order to define the site location, we assess a number of sites in the central Italy region, and we rank them based on a set of scientific and practical criteria. And based on this ranking, we define the best suited sites, which will be in the Grosseto region, and this is the Calvert Park area. Around the area, we will also exploit ancillary sites, as well as existing natural and man-made 1D and 3D feature for geometry and image quality. You see here the zoom of the Calvert Park area. It will be composed of 4 main components, one dedicated to radiometry, one to geometry and image quality, one to atmospheric measurement. Then we will have a laboratory facility, as well as an extension area for field campaign. Let me now start with the radiometric component. So it will be based mainly of 5 large targets, more than 1 hectare. 4 of them will be under 20 meters by 120 meters. A larger one will be under 50 meters. So the rationale of having this big target is really to be suitable for a sensor with a GSD up to 30 meters, so including as well chime. So the material that we will deploy over this target, I have a slide later, but we will have the possibility to validate the radiance over the full dynamic range, as well as validating level 1, level 2A, and level 2B products. Over this target, we will place our instrumentation. It will be some fixed mast where we will have, in particular, a RadConnect-like station, and similar to what is currently in Gobabeb of La Croix site, so similar-based. Then we will also have other mass equipped with NIPSTAR and NOx sensors. And then in order to sample the spatial domain, we will use a robotic rover solution equipped with an SD-like system. in order to have a spatial sampling over the target. This will be essential for the transformation of the ground measurement to the satellite pixel scale, and I have a slide on that later on. So in the geometric part, we will have a large checkerboard target of under 20 meters. That will be for GSD below 5 meters. It will be surrounded by 7 modules that will be used for quick qualitative assessment of spatial resolution for a very high resolution sensor. Then in terms of selection of materials, we proceed this way. We start by defining a set of candidate potential materials. Then we perform laboratory characterization of those materials. And then we select the best one based not only on scientific consideration, but as well as on practical ones. Because, it's about affordable price, but it's also about finding materials which is available in the site proximity. And that's very important because transportation costs can be huge for these very large targets. They need also to be easily deployable and resistant. So we came out finally with a selection of the 5 materials for the radiometric part. So 1 bright and 1 black gravels. You see here the spectrum, and 1 stabilized brown materials. And in addition to these artificial targets, we will have 2 natural targets, and 1 grass and 1 bare soil. No? So we believe that this ensemble of targets collectively allows the validation of the radiance over the full dynamic range, as well as validation of level 1 and surface reflectance, but also higher level products in the 2 natural targets. So let me go to the sampling approach, because I think this is one of the most important innovations in our solution. As I was mentioning, we will have some fixed mast over the target, performing temporal acquisition in a continuous manner, following network protocols, in particular the RadConNet protocols, the HYPERNet one. We will also have an NOx mast. But in the spatial domain, we will use this sort of a mobile platform, fully automated, equipped with a vernier sphere spectroradiometer covering the full spectral range. And we also started by defining the best protocols over this target, minimizing traveling time while preserving spatial representativeness. We also started defining the design and technological solution for that. So let me conclude. As I said, we defined the methods for this new Calval Park site. It is designed to support a wide range of sensors. It is an infrastructure that will be unique, and they work in synergy with existing networks. It will drive technological advance and foster international collaboration. And just let me conclude with the replies to Sid questions. I have no time to go through all of that, but in terms of core measurements at the site, we believe that our layout solution covers the basic core measurements that should be made for Vicari's calibration validation. So meaning ground surface hyperspectral measurement, coupled with atmospheric measurements over the target with the proper sampling in the temporal and spatial domain. And what is missing for an holistic and then all-encompassing Calval? So we believe the Calval Park is the missing component. I mean, a super site meaning a site that ensures multi-mission and multi-purpose capabilities, not only optical and all the level of the optical, but atmosphere, eventually also thermal. Going forward, we probably need a network of those sites. And with that, I stop here, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mike Berfeld from the University of Zurich, and he will talk about time HyperSense data quality assessment.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Berfeld from University of Zurich, and I'm going to talk about our in-depth data quality analysis of some selected sites of the HYPERSENSE campaign we conducted in the year 2021, where we had every NG from NASA JPL coming over to Europe, flying a bunch of missions for us. That's our group up there. Those who remember, Mike Rust was in charge back then. Nice greetings, by the way, from Mike Rust. Also, we had overpasses aligned with our missions with PRISMA and DESIS, and at the same time we collected some ground measurements with field spectroscopy sites. Our goal, our main objectives for this analysis was to find sites where we had alignment of all of those sensors and to apply a consistent atmospheric processing, and in the end to do a cross-validation and an uncertainty assessment of those sites. So how did we go about this? We found 6 sites where we had those matchups. As you can see, we had a nice cross-sect or transect across Europe where we had those matchups. Most importantly for us was to find the matchups within ±1 day. These are the 6 sites. And in this talk, I'm going to concentrate or to focus on Camarena, because there we have a super nice matchup at the same day. So what we did is we reprocessed, well, that was actually our goal, to use AdCore and to use a ROS6 to realign Everest NG and to match up, to have like a rubber sheet approach, to have a very accurate pixel alignment of those 3 measurements. We did not quite manage yet to reprocess Everest NG data with AdCore. That's why we had to rely on reprocessing by NASA JPL colleagues. Thank you very much for your help in that. We had help from UNIMIP to reprocess PRISMA data, and from our DLR colleagues to use PACO to reprocess DESIS data. And in the end, we created with this ROS6 approach, a rubber sheet approach, as I just mentioned, to really match up those images as good as we can. Then we wanted to dig into uncertainty analysis. So what we realized is you have a spatial issue, right, geolocation. So what we did, if a person on the computer might quickly click on the little image there to let the video run, because somehow it does not run automatically. We used an approach, we thought if you take a ground control point, you're not quite sure, or you can't really be sure where you are spatially. So we said we take the image of the sensor, we apply the PSF of the sensor and let it walk around randomly by in a distance of ±1 pixel randomly, and take 1,000 samples of this, get the standard deviation and assume this to be the uncertainty linked to geolocation, and added this to the uncertainty of the measurement. Here we go. Yeah, it moves. Cool. So here you see how the PSF was moving around and how the samples were drawn. With the PSF, we also computed the most pure spectrum following this PSF. Because we did not have detailed information, we assumed this PSF to be Gaussian. So for the uncertainty analysis, we did this approach with uncertainty trees to trace out all the uncertainties. We computed to compare the images, a spectral difference and a spectral ratio. And for the field spectroscopy, we used an approach already published by Andy Hooney, where he propagated the uncertainty of the HDFR measurement. That one was down here, the purple branch. And also for every single measurement, or for every single sensor, we got uncertainties from JPL, we got the uncertainties estimated from PRISMA. There we had to apply another little trick. We used one of the missions in Rio Tinto, where we had a sand field, where we assumed that is a almost Lambertian reflection. We used a 2x2 window, and with the comparison to the SGCP, the spectral grounds comparison point, we computed or estimated an uncertainty. And for DESIS, we used the requirements of PACO as upper and lower boundaries, also to estimate or roughly get an uncertainty buffer around the measurements. And these are the brown branches. So the results, here we have on the left average NG, where we have on top, like on the top right, an insert of the image. At the very center was the matching up pixel with the ground control point. On the left, you see the two spectra with the propagated uncertainties. And on the bottom, you see the spectral difference and the spectral ratio with propagated uncertainties, where you see how well those two measurements agree. I have to mention for this mission, the ground comparison points were optimized for the airborne mission. Nobody knew that we will do this as well for the space-based missions. So the space-based missions do not look as good. Here in Camarena, we have one example, that's SGCP1, where it worked out really well, where you can see the spectral ratio is close to 1, where we want it to be. We have very small uncertainties because average NG has also very small uncertainties. With the space-based, the uncertainties are a bit blown up because of the approach we took. Interestingly, with THESIS and also with PRISMA in the near infrared, those two measurements tend to diverge a little bit. It gets a bit more interesting when you go on and compute a measurement agreement to figure out how well those two agree. We did this at 3 different confidence levels. On top is K1, at the bottom is K level 3, where you see in blue, we have the measurement agreement where we excluded explicitly our uncertainty linked to geolocation, because blowing up the spectral comparison point uncertainty made those uncertainties overlap. So you are like outperforming a little bit just to get a bit of an idea what the influence is. And we can see here at this nice location with average NG, we have quite a good not only in consistency, we are even in agreement with those two measurements. Then in the next step, we wanted to create a multi-scale data set where here is just like a schematic idea how this should look like, where we have all the 3 missions in one big data cube, which will be processed for all the 6 missions and then will be available for the broader community to do all the tests as baseline for CHIME missions. And here is what it looks like in the end. So what we did is we created a logical map. If we have a big raster over the entire area and we aligned all those mission images, that's just one channel to show how those missions line up. We have in gray, as you can see here, that's average NG, in purple is PRISMA, and in yellow was THESIS. What we did in the end, also to have like a reference sensor to compare to, we did a weighted mean. The weights were computed by the inverse of the uncertainties. So the smaller the uncertainties, the bigger is the weight that is contributing. This is an example of the reference sensor. And if you zoom in at a random pixel, you see here in purple, you have the reference sensor. In dark blue, you have average NG. In light blue, you have THESIS. And you see how this reference sensor fits nicely into this and always being a bit closer to average NG, who has the smallest uncertainties. And also, as I mentioned before, greetings from my crust. I was asked to mention shortly this EASY forum we organized in Bern earlier this year. Lovely. It's my last slide anyways, where we tried to bring onto one table all the major space agencies and universities working with hyperspectral missions, where we want to publish a white paper where we want to suggest a way how to deal with disparities between sensors, explicitly not uncertainties, because uncertainties you can propagate, where we want to suggest a way how to deal with different sensors and how to intercompare and harmonize data. with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So the next presentation, yes, exactly, is expected to be a video. So unfortunately, Philip cannot come here, so we can see the video and then we can, okay.
I'm so sorry that I'm not able to be with you in person at the workshop this week. However, I am pleased to provide you some insights into the ground networks that may be needed for vegetation products planned for SBG and CHYME. This presentation emerges from the S-Traits working group that was supported by the Synthesis Center of the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research in Leipzig. Our group was predicated on the notion that both the biology and SBG and CHYME remote sensing communities have common needs and data gaps for the study of plant traits at the global scale, particularly in the context of climate change and biodiversity loss. We want to advocate for harmonization of in situ data sets that can be used for this purpose, and then scope out how we design networks and leverage existing networks that can be used for calibration and validation needs of foliar trait products at 30-meter resolution. It is good to start with a little context. Shown at the left is from a 2016 paper by Sandra Diaz. It shows one of the predominant concepts in trait ecology, the global spectrum of plant form and function. This is related to the idea of the leaf economic spectrum, which defines the range of leaf function between investment in nitrogen and leaf mass per area, which is a trade-off between the investment in growth, or nitrogen, and leaf construction costs, or leaf mass per area. This pattern exists across all biomes globally. I just want to note also that Diaz identified plant height as an additional orthogonal dimension of this global spectrum of plant form and function, and that's something that we can also retrieve from remote sensing, LiDAR or SAR perhaps. On the right, I show a similar figure, except this is derived from neon trait maps. Nitrogen and LMA are true traits that we can readily estimate from imaging spectroscopy, and as such, both are proposed as products for SBG and CHYME. The traits in the PCA plot on the right are different from those in Diaz, but the patterns are the same. This is where the synergy between biology and remote sensing communities lies. With remote sensing of traits, we will be able to provide a vastly larger data set to understand our planet than is possible from in situ data alone. With that said, there are significant needs to make this happen. From the vegetation remote sensing community, one of the major take-home messages from the final plenary at this workshop that was held in Rome in 2022 was that we still lack sufficient data. This includes everything, leaf and canopy spectral data, as well as trait measurements. We are not alone. The biologists also lack such data. So there's a need across both of these communities, which I think this network might be able to satisfy. One of the main sources of trait data at global scales is the TRI database out of the Max Planck Institute. However, TRI consists of user-contributed data and was never intended to be systematic. As such, TRI has many data gaps, especially spatially, and although these are declining with new contributions, shown in red here over the previous version of TRI, TRI still significantly lacks information on temporal variation. In particular, the focus of the vegetation community has usually been traits at periods of peak greenness in a particular vegetation type, but SBG and CHYME will ultimately capture the full phenological cycles across the growing season, and therefore we will need data to represent this. As well, databases such as TRI very poorly represent differences that may occur year to year. And this can be important because traits may vary with climate, say drought, for example. So we are advocating for a collaborative global network of networks that can meet the needs of both the remote sensing community and fill gaps needed by biologists. Although I should also say that we hope that eventually the data from SBG and CHYME will also fill the needs of biologists, particularly in remote areas of the world where it's difficult to collect trait data. This effort involves leveraging existing networks and developing new networks with local teams in places where the data are needed. These networks should take a multi-scale approach. Most traits are measured at the scale of a leaf or a few leaves. For imaging spectroscopy applications, these need to be from the top of the canopy, but obviously a single leaf, even if it's from the top of the canopy, is much smaller than the pixel size of most image data. Top of canopy leaf data are generally assumed to be representative of the top of the crown of that species at a particular location, but 30-meter SPG and chime data will incorporate crowns that in most places will have many species in it, such as is shown in the upper right on this figure. For this, we require stand or plot composition data, which are used for community-weighted scaling or relative scaling by species. So there's a need for plot composition data as well. However, leaf trait data and plot scale data are expensive to collect, especially in remote areas, and ultimately we have to have a sufficient sample size to be able to link to global remote sensing. So for this, we're going to need high-resolution trait maps, such as can be derived from drone or airplane imaging spectroscopy. We would use the drone or airplane imaging spectroscopy to scale to the spaceborne imaging spectroscopy. So I added a grid to the neon-derived trait map in the lower right to further illustrate some of what we envision happening. This also illustrates some of the issues with upscaling that are centered around mixed pixels. So pixels aren't just mixed in terms of the species that might be present, but might be mixed in terms of fractional cover, as shown by the road that goes through the middle of this particular image. One of the networks that can be leveraged for SPG and CHIME is the U.S. National Ecological Observatory Network, or NEON. NEON consists of 20 ecoclimatically defined domains in which imaging spectroscopy is flown annually at 50 or so 10 by 10 kilometer sites. There are also additional networks in which trait data are regularly collected at scales that may be compatible with satellites or also with airborne imaging spectroscopy that could be used for scaling. The list that's shown on the right here is not comprehensive, but it gives an example of the different groups globally who might be able to participate. I should also note that there are efforts to synthesize data from these networks, such as BN, TRI, or SPLOT. What will be needed across these networks to meet the needs of global trait mapping? This is where the challenges start. As with the 20 NEON domains that are shown here, we will need a network to represent the range of plant form and function across the globe, including climatic and other environmental variation, as well as disturbance, vegetation age, and phenology or seasonal dynamics. And note that phenology is complex. Peak greenness occurs at different times in different biomes. Consider, for example, Mediterranean ecosystems, which experience peak greenness during the winter-spring wet season. We also want to encourage these networks to have open data so that we can crosswalk measurements across differing missions and different needs. Wrapping this up, I cannot currently say what size the network should be, but we know that we will be challenged, at least initially, by the frequency and density of observations needed to ensure that models of traits perform well at the global scale. Eventually, we will have enough data to do this, but this will require coordination among different international groups, and in the end will also require contributions from individual investigators. To make all of this work, we will need some level of standardization of sampling methods to ensure consistency, as well as the ability to crosswalk data. We will not be able to entirely accomplish this, since it is hard to standardize across laboratory measurements, for example, but it should be a goal. Ultimately, however, this network will be needed will need to be linked to airborne remote sensing methods that will facilitate larger data sets that we can scale to satellites. Airborne data sets, again, are also going to be important in remote and inaccessible areas. Thank you very much for your attention, and please reach out to me or any of my co-authors shown here for further discussion. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the workshop.
Thanks, Philip.
Yeah, our next speaker is Camille Desjardins from CINES. We'll talk about present and future radiometric calibration and validation of hyperspectral sensors.
Thank you. So I'm Camille Desjardins from CNES, and I'm a level 1 a radiometric calibration expert, and I present you today the calibration and validation activity on hyperspectral imaging system in our group. So over the last 2 decades, CNES has calibrated and cross-calibrating a wide range of multispectral imaging systems. Here you have a presentation of all sensors present in our database. We have 15 sensors in it. So we use several vicarious calibration methods to calibrate or validate the method. Here you have all the methods we use. And each method using different targets, and it is different approach. The principle of all the methods is to compare a sensor measurement to a simulated one. The simulating comes from a model, a reference space-bound sensor, or in situ measurement. We currently adapt historical multispectral vicarious methodology for hyperspectral sensor, and we have started with the two circle one, the PIX method. It is our historical method, and in situ, and the method based on in situ measurement. So now I describe our method based on the pseudo-invariant calibration site. So CNES was a precursor in the use of this site. In the 19th, my colleague have selected 20 sites in Sahara. Here you have a map with the location of each of these 20 sites. And afterward, 6 of them are endorsed by the CEOs, and it is the site in red on the map. The purpose of this method is to intercalibrate between different sensors operating simultaneously or not. In fact, it is important that. And also validation of sensor temporal stability. It is important to note that with our method, we are capable to cross-compare one sensor with all sensors with present in our database, so 50 sensors. So it is a method very interesting to have gain adjustment between one sensor and one other. So it could be, for example, used to have a radiometric harmonization on level 1 or level 2. So this method provides us a cross-calibration coefficient. So it is the sensor to calibrate. It is the ratio between the sensor to calibrate and the sensor and the reference sensor. Now let's move on our in situ measurement. So we have 3 sites with exactly the same instrumentation, which is composed of 12 bands. In fact, it is bands with wavelength same than Sentinel-2. These 3 sites are located at Lacroix, near Marseille, in France, at La Masquère, near Toulouse, and in Gobabeb in Namibia. Gobabeb, it is a site in cooperation with ESA. And in fact, La Masquère, it's with field surface, so it is only used for level 2 validation. And the 2 others are used for level 1 validation and level 1 calibration. The data provided by our instrument at Lacroix and Gobabeb are sent to the RadCalNet network. So It is important to note that our system measure surface reflectance, but also BRDF and atmosphere. Only nadir data are accessible to the public, but we have internally the measurement in the same angular condition as the optical sensor to calibrate. So we use this information to do our calibration and validation. But it is not the same that you can be done with RadCalNet data. And we also fit an hyperspectral spectrum on the 12-band measurement to have an hyperspectral spectrum and to do a spectral response function adjustment. We currently update the radiometer, this radiometer presented in the 3 sites. We currently develop an hyperspectral one. It is composed of 3 spectral radiometers. Here you have the requirement of each of them. It is planned to have the same measurement protocol as the multispectral one. So it will provide us the surface reflectance, the directional effect of the site, and also at the atmosphere information at every time of the day. And this prototype will be delivered to CNES next month for internal characterization. And we plan to deploy it at Lacro site in the middle of the next years. And after that, we start a comparison phase with the actual multispectral instrument for 1 year. So now let's move on the application to Prisma calibration and validation. So we currently at CNES a collaboration with ASI on Prisma calibration and validation. And following the 2019 CNES Vicarious campaign, Prisma official absolute gains have integrated our feedback. So for this calibration and validation, we use the 2 methods I have described before. Prisma calibration is done over PIX with Sentinel-2A as reference sensor. Prisma validation is done using in situ measurement and also PIX method with HYPERSPECTRAL as reference sensor for near bands only. So here you have the result for the 2023 campaigns. As we have here only the gain modification between the 2019 campaign and the current campaign. So here you see the gain modification between the 2 campaigns, and you can see that the cross calibration with Sentinel-2A in blue is present a slow variation for short wavelength and a good stability for swear band. I recall that our gain are not applicable to atmospheric bands, and you can see also in red a good consistency with Sentinel-3B as reference sensor for the near part of the spectrum. So now let's move on the radiometric calibration of on in situ measurement. So here you have the result for near spectrum and SWIR spectrum with 10 products of GoBabeb. You can see that there is a good consistency between Prisma official calibration and ROSAS measurement and or in situ measurement. 2-3% for the VNIR and 3-5% for the SWIR. I recall here that our measurement at the site has only 1 band in SWIR at 1.6 micrometer, so it is not sufficient to constrain the spectral interpretation of the surface reflectance in in the last part of the spectrum, and it could be the reason to see that there is a large deviation of all results here around 2.2 micrometer. So to conclude, we currently adapt of multispectral Vickers method for hyperspectral imagers. We develop an hyperspectral instrument to improve in situ measurement at LACRO and GoBABEB, and a prototype to be deployed in the next year at LACRO. We have a collaboration with ASI on Prisma radiometric calibration and validation activities. And we have similar activities ongoing on disease and map sensor, and we plan to cross-compare map and Prisma sensor soon. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation. So we can move to the next one. It's Massimo Musacchio from ENGV about the cool system for the evaluation of level 2 products. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Now, sorry. To go back, please, to the first one. Oh, thanks a lot. I'm Massimo Musacchio. I belong to INGV as a partner of a team that is developing a project funded by Italian Space Agency. And the project is aimed to consolidate a L2 product for the Prisma second generation mission. The project has the main objectives to analyze which will be the response of the atmosphere signal for the off-nadir view, that is a feasibility that is planned for the next mission, next generation of Prisma sensor. And so also to understand how could be how the algorithm that are already existing can be adapted to the new type of signal received at the top of atmosphere. And one of the parallel objectives of this project is also to train new high qualified personnel for the use of these new missions. And the project has two main subsystems. It's composed by two main subsystems. One is aimed to characterize the atmosphere, and one aimed to set up and characterize the proper analysis for mineralogy and petrology definition for CalVal activities, beside to the acquisition of surface spectral characteristics. For the first part of the system, has been developed a procedure for atmospheric correction procedure that is based on two different steps calculating the parameters for the correction processes with or without the correction of topography and agency effect, but considering of nadir view. The system is based on Motran 6 version, and it allows us to make some first analysis on which could be the difference between, in terms of percentage differences between the view, the off-nadir view, considering the two extreme 35 degrees of nadir with an albedo about 30% and a deviation of the sun-zenith angle. We can see that the difference between the two different type of acquisition, of nadir acquisition, they has a difference in percentage that is around 0.1 with sun-zenith angle about 60 degrees. So there are not very many differences in our latitude. The impact could be either with the elevation, with the higher latitude acquisition. And all the parameter has been also part of the IMA core, that is the processor that is applied in this process, and also part of the presentation that has been presented yesterday on the comparison of different atmospheric procedure yesterday afternoon. And for concern the ground part of this project, we focus on two different sites, both in Sardinia. One is called the Campo Pisano, and one is called the Sale Porcus, that they present several conditions that could be let them suitable for Calval activities, and for that maybe could be also interesting to be included in the analysis presented by Fabrizio for the next, for the improve the Calval site around Europe or world. That's for hyperspectral and multispectral application. So we consider two parts of this task. One is the site characterization. It means that beside the surface spectroscopy acquisition that have been done by using portable spectrodiometer, but also by using a system solution similar to ones Bendor presented early this morning. Beside this also sample for each site acquiring material to be analyzed by mineralogy and petrology, the atmosphere characterization, and also the analysis of seasonal stability for understanding the constant in environment, how the environment is constant in time for considering this. All this information is also used for the TOA generation. We are developing a simulator for producing top of atmosphere irradiance according to the Prisma second generation characteristics. These are the two sites. On the left, the Sale Porcu pond, and on the right, in the bottom part, the Campo Pisano area. This is some results of the first 2 year early acquisition on the Sale Porcu pond. It means Sale Porcu means dirty salt. It's a basin where the salt every year is deposited, but the salt is not suitable for food or for maintaining or for alimentary reason. And it's dirty because this basin has been imagined as a closed basin in time with no recharge by water coming from the sea or from the surrounding area. It means that the chemistry of the basin is very stable in time. Even if during the winter time it became totally wet. So we have during a very short period coming from May to October, a deposition of a salty crust, very thin. And it's interesting because year by year, this doesn't change in composition, also for the spectral behavior. And we were also lucky because during our field campaign, both EMMAP and Prisma have been acquired in simultaneous with the ground acquisition. So we have a full set of data that is very strongly correlated. For what concerning the TOA reference generators, is a task that is just beginning this period. This is the logical scheme that we use to simulate the TOA products for Prisma second generation. And we are issuing with ASI the necessity to have more information coming from the industrial part according the possibility to gain this information concerning the sensospectral response function, because if you need to simulate with a real ground truth spectra and with a properly corrected, properly characterized atmosphere, we also need to have a lot of constraint of an instrument to rely on the TOA produced. The site characterization, as a geologist, I say that it's very important by our side to have a great number of information considering consistent in the geology of the outcrop of the area, both for the outcropping salty pond, but also for the surrounding area, because we have to be sure, for example, that the pond is very isolated by the surrounding area. So we are doing some tectonic measurements, to understand if the fault that border this area is really close, there's no more activity along that. So we perform also 2 different wells in the western and eastern part of the basin to understand which is the stratigraphy that may produce some salty, some mineral that we can find in the outcropping salt. And so there are many different measurements made with the instrument, both on ground, in field, and in the laboratory. And we have several information depicting which is the outcropping in the area. So the main mineralogy composing the salt, for example, is made from calcite, quartz, halite, and gypsum with different percentage of relative abundance, but of course they are very constant for all the lake. And the same we did for the other sites, Campo Pisano, that highlight that the component, the mineral composition depends by different phasing of the mineralization, coming from primary mineralization due to the minerals that have been deposited, but also to the interrelation with the rock encasing and with the oxidation late progress. And thanks for the attention of this presentation. I would just like some items. We are in the mid-time of this project, so we are just analyzing the first results. Deeper scientific results will be presented in next 2024 full meeting, so we will be there, please search for us. And considering that one of the topics of the project is to train a new generation of researchers, we are also organizing different summer school. If you have more information, there's a poster just here. And we have a planned school up to 2027 for Calval activities. This is the pond, like a pier when it's totally dry. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have now the last speaker of the session, Mohammad Tahersima, and about the RadConnect calibration and validation hyperspectral instruments.
Good morning. I'm Mohammad Tahersima, and I'm presenting the use of RadConnect in calibration and validation of hyperspectral instruments. Me and my co-authors are from the Earth Sciences Division of NASA Goddard. So, as the name suggests, RadConnect stands for, is a network of radiometric calibration sites, and the site operators are independent. That is, that they have flexibility to choose how they generate their spectral surface reflectance. For example, we saw, for example, sites like Gobabe or Le Crau in France, they have BRDF measurement capabilities, or some of the sites, like the Baotou site in China, they use spectrometers, and some of them use radiometers, multispectral radiometers, and feed spectral data to those to generate spectral surface reflectance responses. One way or another, they need to adhere to good meteorological practices, and their data need to follow those rules, so to streamline the data processing to generate the TOA reflectance from the data. And there have been demonstrations how RadConnect could be used as a common reference for calibration of multispectral instruments. The same principle technically applies for hyperspectral instruments, and this talk demonstrates that for DSIS and IMIT in particular. The concept is simple, that the predicted radiometric response of these well-characterized test sites could be predicted within a defensible uncertainty budget. And the uncertainty budget should include a variety of factors like the instrument calibration, radiance in the field, atmospheric inputs, radiative transfer code, solar irradiance, and assumptions and generalizations made to do the prediction. Our uncertainty analysis have been telling us that the surface effects dominate the overall budget. So the focus has been studying the surface effects recently. And since IMIT and DSIS are on the International Space Station, have some angle in their observations, this was an opportunity to characterize the BRDF effect of the site using those two instruments as well. So the question we want to answer is, if a sensor is viewing the site from an angle, how much should be worried about the BRDF effect for this site, for the red cats. The International Space Station has a unique orbital track that enables the instrument on the platform to observe a range of angles, seeing the site under a variety of sun illumination geometry. And IMIT and DISIS, being on the same platform, they get opportunities for coincident views, but because they have different field of views, and DISIS in particular has tilting capabilities and could be tasked, they often have differences in their view angles. The scene processing is straightforward. The red cat site is a kilometer squared area, and we get the pixels corresponding to that area, average them. Both IMIT and DISIS have radiance-based SI traceability, so when you apply the calibration coefficients, you get radiance values. And we convert that radiance to reflectance so that we can compare them with the common reference of red CalNet for this study. And you see the result of that conversion in the bottom right plot. You see the solid and dashed red lines. Those are TOE reflectance for red CalNet and DISIS as an example. For the rest of the talk, when we say intercomparison, basically I'm comparing those two curves. And we did this process for 19 coincident views of the site, 15 DISIS scenes and 4 image scenes that we identified having corresponding red CalNet site within 15 minutes. And you see the statistics of those results on the right. The top right is the mean, bottom is the spread, the standard deviation of it. From these, we could tell that the instruments agree within their combined uncertainty, that is assuming a flat 5% uncertainty for each of DISIS and IMIT. Exceptions are in the absorption lines of 760 and 940 nanometer, and when the lambda is smaller than 450. And you overall see a larger spread of DISIS compared to IMIT, and that should be expected because these 4 scenes of IMIT have more consistent view angles of 7 to 11 degrees, whereas the DISIS observations varied wider from 0 to 20. And the polar plots are showing correction factors calculated based on each individual absolute intercomparison for each of the scenes. And something interesting to note here is that when the observations are near nadir and close to the solar noon, we get pretty decent agreement with the nadir viewing reference red CalNets. Another study that we did was studying the coincident view pairs of DISIS and IMIT. This is relative. We are not using red CalNet for this, so basically dividing IMIT and DISIS spectra relative to each other. The coincident views happened on June 23rd and August 4th in 2023, 6 weeks apart, pretty close in time as well. That suggests instruments should be stable when comparing the two and the site as well. The blue line is for June 23rd, when IMIT was observing the site and the back reflection geometry, and August 4th was a case where IMIT was dominantly observing the forward reflected geometry. In both cases, DISIS had a near nadir view, and you notice a large shift between the two, in both cases, we are looking at the same surface target under substantially similar atmosphere, close in time, sun angles are the same, the ratio of the instruments are the same. So really, the main difference between them is the view angle. And so this, again, is pointing to a BRDF effect. We can quantify this BRDF effect. It's not animated. We can quantify this BRDF effect by dividing these color-coded curves, arriving at that spectrally flat-looking black line. That amounts to about 7%. But that 7% is not a single, it's not for a single view geometry. It collectively represents the 4 observations. And we could validate this result by taking the BRDF model generated in 2019 based on the 2018 goniometric measurements of the site. it's pretty much we arrive at the same numbers. So in a sense, this study validates, it's a more recent study validates that those results remain valid. I think we are short in time, right? So I'm going to skip this. Just the takeaway message is that consistent scatter angles between observations would result in good agreement between observations. And in conclusion, we use RadCalNet as a common reference for emit indices and used disease and emit data to generate a BRDF model for the site based on the on-orbit sensor. I guess the main key takeaway that I should mention is that radiometric data is more sensitive in the forward reflection geometry. That is, if you look at this, the maximum deviation when you are in the forward reflection could become substantial for exceptional cases compared to the back reflection geometry. So looking at this BRDF model, you see a hotspot, but the problem is not the hotspot, it's actually the opposite of it, the opposite direction of it. And in the future, if we want to do directional UAV collections of the site, do transect AST collections. This data actually was measured 3 weeks ago. We are processing that. And we want to add data from PACE, Prisma, and Nmap to develop a better model, more comprehensive model, and hopefully in the future, do the similar study for SPG and CHIME. That's it, and this is the, I guess, our response to the seed questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the speakers and also the chairs. We will continue this session at 11, so this was just the first part, also including a discussion. Before we go for coffee, I would also like to remind the speakers of the open science session to upload their presentations already in this break, because we don't have a break in between those other sessions. And with that, have a coffee and a cookie, and we will see each other soon.
So let's get started. And first thing, I'm very pleased to introduce the chairs of this next session. It's a continuation of the CalVal session, and we have Valentina Boccia from the European Space Agency and Chip Miller from NASA JPL. Thank you very much for being here, and let's get started. Thanks.
Okay, thank you everyone for returning promptly from the coffee. Our first speaker will be Regina Eckert from JPL, and she will be speaking on nonlinear calibration of SPG, VSWR, and related imaging spectrometers.
All right, excellent. Thank you all so much. This is like slightly different, so I'm glad that everyone's like sugared up from the coffee break, so you're ready to hear about instrument calibration nonlinearity. All right, so this is actually some experiments that started with the MISE imaging spectrometer, which I'll talk about in a bit, but we're looking at the nonlinearity of the detector for SPG VSWR, which is a chroma D, which is the same as CHIME, so that should be something that is applicable across instruments. I don't actually know all the instrument detectors, so I'll be interested in talking to you later about different ones. All right, to get started here. Let's see. Okay, excellent. So just to ground us a little bit, I think we all know this when we're doing this push broom imaging spectroscopy. We have our detector, which is taking this kind of spatial spectral image, and then we're scanning across the ground. And what this means is that as we kind of take all of our measurements, we are taking it through this detector. And so we're relying on this detector responding the same across different light levels. And something that we do with emit, AVERIS, and what we're planning for SPG is we're planning to use the Earth as our calibrator. And so just to introduce this nonlinearity topic through that kind of calibration lens, if we take that vicarious calibration on the ground, that reflectance measurement, so here's some actual reflectance measurements. if we take these reflectance measurements from the ground and then we are able to promote that up through the atmosphere to a radiance level that we then kind of divide out to do a correction factor on our radiometry, similar to some of the things that we just saw, you might expect that across light levels you would get that same correction factor. But something that we saw with this calibration for HYPERS-3 is that as you have something that's going from a really dark target, so asphalt, up to something that is very bright, so kind of like a dirt playa, you're actually getting different RCC correction factors. Now, this can actually be due to various things, but one of the things that we are most interested in kind of updating our understanding and doing a better job calibrating is the nonlinearity of the detector. That can particularly affect, dark surfaces, so aquatic surfaces might be something that you'd be looking at, but it actually affects every single spectrum because every single spectrum has these areas where you have a darker area where there are atmospheric absorption features. And so we're hoping that if we can really understand the nonlinearity of our detectors better, that will help us improve our atmospheric correction and do a better job providing the great measurements that everyone wants to use for all of our downstream applications, right? All right, but the question is, how do we actually understand the nonlinearity of this detector? So again, this is something that really came from work that we did with MISE, which is the Mapping Imaging Spectrometer for Europa. This is an imaging spectrometer on Europa Clipper, which just launched about a month ago, actually. So really exciting stuff going out to Europa, Jupiter's moon, and it's a really, really cool spectrometer. But one thing about it is that it ended up having a more nonlinear response than we were expecting, which, to kind of allay any fears, part of the issue there is that it has a really low energy detector design. So it's kind of a special detector design because it's going so far out into the solar system, and so had to use a lot less power. And so we think that's really where this nonlinearity came from. But this is actually kind of a blessing in disguise in some way because we could actually test in the lab a lot of different ways to measure this nonlinearity. And because there was actually a more significant nonlinearity feature, you could actually see that you were calibrating it correctly or incorrectly. So nonlinearity, if I'm just saying this and you're like, great, what does that mean? You can think about it as if you have two different light sources going into this integrating sphere, and then you're measuring it with your instrument. And if you were going to, say, measure A by itself and get about 1,000 digital numbers, or DN, and then B by itself and get 30 digital numbers, or DN, if you had a linear response, you'd expect that those two things would just simply add. So you'd get 1,030 DN. But if you have a nonlinear response, you would actually measure 1,020 DN, which doesn't seem like a big difference, but that's when we're talking about these really low signal levels, it can really make a difference in that radiance that you're estimating out and can impact the downstream processing. So what you can see over here on the right is this kind of deviation from linearity. So if you had an input measured DN that was exactly linear, it would be that kind of black dotted line where the output would be exactly the same. But for MISE, we're having to kind of do this correction, and it's this kind of nonlinear behavior, especially at the low and high ends of the spectrum, or signal levels. All right. So this is actually a really difficult thing to measure, and this is why we wanted to come tell you about what we've done today, and I'd love to really learn from you all if you've done this with your instruments and doing nonlinear characterization, because it's a really difficult measurement to make. Basically, you have to rely on the linearity of some other source in order to say, this is what is linear, and then identify what is nonlinear in your instrument. So we tried this with a MIT. We used a ASD kind of spectrometer as a reference measurement, as well as we used basically other instruments, not just an ASD, to try to look at varying light levels and see if we could get the nonlinearity out. But this was not very reliable, and we end up not using any nonlinearity correction on a MIT currently. But for MISE, what we did is we kind of threw the kitchen sink at it once we knew it was a problem. So we did at least 3 different measurements. We did this illumination source with variable intensity. It was a very reliable source. We changed the integration time of the instrument. That's actually less reliable overall. And then we also did an integrating sphere measurement where we have these dual sources that are measured individually and together. And then finally for SBG, what we did for an engineering focal plane array was did a pulse laser. So basically you can time this pulse laser to the integrating time of your detector. And that way you can make sure you know, I know we got exactly this many pulses in this frame, this many pulses in this frame, and so you can actually correlate that input light level to what you actually got out from the detector. All right, so again, just to allay any fears, these detectors are not all the same. So for MISE, it's a Chroma A detector from Teledyne. Again, that low power design, very important. Emit, AVERS NG, AVERS 3, AVERS 5, these are all Chroma A or analog out detectors. And then SBG vSphere, like CHIME, is going to use the Chroma D or digital out detector. All right, so here's how this linearity calibration kind of works. So first we do, for MISE, we're showing this kind of black body temperature sweep. So we have this variable input source. We can step through all of these different levels of input radiances. And then for each of the pixels, you can map out, okay, this is how much I actually measured. Here's that linear relationship between those two things. So with an ideal kind of linear response, this is what I'd get out. And then you're able to create this relationship between what you actually measured and what you should have measured with that ideal detector. And so what you're actually seeing here is that if you get a good enough measurement, you can do this linearity correction on a pixel-wise basis. And so for MISE, we were able to show that for those pixels where we actually got a good enough measurement for that, we can do a PCA decomposition on the linearity, and then we can even correct better the nonlinearity of the detector on a pixel-wise basis. So this is something we're thinking about for the future of SVG. And this is just to show that we did this for a lot of different ways of measuring this, and they all do correspond. So I think one of the recommendations I have if you are doing a nonlinearity characterization is adopting multiple methods and then comparing them, I think is a really important aspect. So maybe more important and more interesting to those of us in the room who are thinking about SVG and CHIME is the linearity of the Chroma D detector. So again, we have this pulse laser that we were able to time with the focal plane array. And so you can see that as we have a larger number of pulses, that's increasing the amount of light in. And just to kind of jump to the conclusion here, we're showing that with MISE, we have this kind of large linearity deviation, and that's in black. And then with the Chroma D, especially in this kind of in-flight ADC range of use, it's much more linear. So that's super exciting and something we're going to investigate for the future. All right. And then something we're planning for the future is potentially an in-flight calibration. So we're looking into that and look forward to telling you about it in the future. So, all right. I think I'm probably out of time. So anyway, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Regina, and I'm glad to welcome our next speaker, Peter De Vries, who will present on hyperspectral in situ surface reflectances from the LAN HyperNet network. Thank you.
Thanks, Valentina. So today I'll be talking about the LAN HyperNet network on behalf of the HyperNet Consortium. And essentially, HyperNet is made up of the land HyperNet and water HyperNet networks. They're sort of equivalent parts of the same network. And the HyperNet network as a whole was described in this paper by Kevin Ruddick. And actually, this is the first in sort of a set of papers that were all published in the same Frontiers issue. And so there's a few papers from this issue in this presentation, and so I've always formatted them like this. But so HyperNets, also I should note that there's also a poster from the Water HyperNet network just behind the screen. And there's also a dedicated paper on Water HyperNets from Kevin Ruddick on the same Frontiers issue. But so HyperNets takes hyperspectral pointable HCRF measurements. So HCRF being case 8 here in the top right diagram. And so essentially its main aim is to take measurements to validate level 2 bottom of atmosphere surface reflectance validation. In this sort of spider web diagram on the bottom right, it's from Fabrizio Nero's paper in 2021, sort of showing the ESA Calval strategy. And here it shows that the readiness level in 2021 for the level 2 bottom of atmosphere validation was actually a bit lacking. And so HYPERNETS really fills this gap, and I think now the readiness level would be assessed much higher due to HYPERNETS. So the HYPSTAR instrument was developed as part of the HYPERNETS project, and essentially it was developed by our colleagues in Tartu University in Estonia, and it's been designed to provide automated in situ multi-angular measurements of both land and water targets. Specifically in the land HYPERNETS network, we use the HYPSTAR XR, so with an extended range, which has a veneer module that is very similar to the water module, but it's also complemented with a SWIR sensor. And so I've put the specs here on the bottom left, and on the bottom right we see some images of the HYPSTAR XR instrument. So number 1 sort of indicates the instrument itself. The 2 here indicates the validation module, an LED is used to sort of validate the measurements every night. And on the right we also see the rugged PC that controls the measurements and the Yocto picture that does the scheduling and so on. So this HYPSTAR XR instrument has been deployed at 10 different land HYPERNET sites, 7 of which are useful for Calval. The other 3 were essentially test sites with rather small areas, and so not quite suitable for Calval, but just for internal testing. And so between these different sites, the 7 sites, we have quite a nice range of different land covers. We have desert, we have snow, agriculture, and forests, and so quite a nice variety there. So at each of these sites, measurement sequence is scheduled every half hour. And so the measurement sequences start and end with some irradiance measurements. For each series of measurements, we essentially take 10 repeated measurements, so we take 10 times the spectrum, and between these 10 scans we average, and it also allows us to determine the random uncertainty from the standard deviation between the scans. So we start by irradiance and end with irradiance, and between we essentially take radiance measurements at a range of different geometries. The geometries are shown here in the bottom middle. And so it's sort of eastward and westward facing because that essentially matches the typical satellite viewing angles. Actually, it's a bit hard to see, but the Sentinel-2 viewing angles are shown here as well and aligned well. The top here, we also show sort of the way our geometries are defined. Essentially, we've just chosen to define them in as close a way as possible to the typical satellite geometries. And maybe I should also note here on the bottom right, we show the sort of distribution of relative azimuth angles we cover within a single day. So we've got quite a good coverage, which can be quite useful, for example, for BRDF modeling. So all the measurements taken at the various sites are then automatically sent to a central server for processing. And the processing is done maybe quite unique for this type of network with detailed uncertainty information and error correlation information as well. So here on the right side, we show some of our uncertainty components on our level 1 radiance product. And so you see there is a random uncertainty shown in red, and there's 2 systematic uncertainties for which you also store the error correlation matrix. But here we've separated into 2 components because here essentially the blue line gives the contributions that are independent between radiance and irradiance, and the orange line gives the components that are correlated between radiance and irradiance, and importantly, these will mostly cancel out when we calculate the reflectance. So the reflectance products will only have 2 contributions. In terms of processing steps, we start by reading in the raw data and then calibrating it. The calibration comes from the lab characterization that was done by Tartu University, and also includes detailed uncertainties. Then in the next step, we do some pre-processing where essentially all the irradiance measurements at the start and the end are interpolated to the timestamps of all the radiance measurements.
They're also spectrally interpolated. And then once we have them on the same scales, we can calculate the surface reflectance. And finally, we also do some site-specific quality checks. And the code for this is available open source on GitHub. Once we have our data products of different levels, they are made available through the Land HyperNet's data portal. This allows us to download either monthly zip files per site, or you can also query the data using a specific time range or some other selection criteria, depending which level you want, for example. Currently, it's open to some beta users, like the optical MPC. We have also the Prisma and Nmap validation teams. Feel free to get in touch if you want to have early access, but public access is also expected by the end of the year. So regardless, it won't be too long. Then I also wanted to highlight some of the science results. First at our GOBA website. Here we have focused a lot on essentially comparing with RADCALnet and sort of a way of validating our measurements as well. And so a first study was done by Morvan Sinclair and presented at IGARS 2023, doing a RADCALnet versus HYPERNet's bottom of atmosphere comparison. We then also did a study assessing the feasibility of vicarious calibration by propagating the HYPERNet's data to top of atmosphere and comparing it to Sentinel-2, Landsat 8, and Prisma. And so one of the plots from this paper is shown here at the bottom, where sort of the bottom half of the plots show some of the biases in blue for HYPERNets and in orange for RADCALnet. So we see quite good consistency. We see biases within a few percent, so everything is behaving sort of as expected. And we've done that for a number of matchups within this paper. We're then also currently working on a study looking at BRDF at the GOBA website using both HYPERNet and RADCALnet data. This is currently in preparation, but here on the right, I've shown some polar plots showing some of the sort of reflectance measurements we've done. We've essentially measured at all angles as opposed to just the standard sequence with the sort of east and west geometries. And we see that there's clearly sort of a lot of backscatter. The top plot here shows essentially the reflectances at 740 nanometers. And the bottom plot shows residuals compared to the BRDF model, which are typically on the order of a few percent. Also important to note is that HYPSTAR data, so the HYPERNet's data at GOBAWeb is also being, it's also planned to be included in RADCALnet. So there will be a second RADCALnet site at GOBAWeb. We're currently going through the processing to make it consistent with sort of the nadir 10 nanometer sampling of RADCALnet. And it'd be very useful if one of the two sites is down, there'll be some backup to always have data from GOBAWeb. Then also some science results from the White and Wood sites. So this is a deciduous forest. And we're sort of more looking at surface reflectance, seasonal dynamics. Also focusing on the bottom of atmosphere validation of multispectral data against essentially Sentinel-2 and the Landsat 8 and 9. There's some plots here shown on the left showing that, you know, again, we have quite good matchups, everything sort of working as expected. But one thing that was very important here was to really deal with essentially the impact of the spatial variability and also the complexities of the canopy. Essentially, we have to be careful to not be like, depending on what angle we're pointing at, we might be looking at different trees. That's already a challenge. But also specifically, if we're looking at quite close to nadir, we're often looking at shadow, which can be, of course, quite detrimental. So here we have to be careful to limit our viewing zenith angles and essentially mask some of the badly affected ones. In future, we also want to look at the validation potential of some of the vegetation ECVs from the HYPSTAR data. And we'll look at that in the future. So in conclusion, the Land HyperNet networks provides critical data for the validation of present and upcoming hyperspectral missions. The Land HyperNet is operationally taking HCRF surface reflectance measurements using the HYPSTAR XR over different land surfaces. All the data is being automatically processed and made available near real time on the data portal. Near real time is typically within 24 hours, but sometimes there's more delays, specifically with some of the sites like GOBAWeb, where data transfer is more difficult. And so there was a range of papers published recently in this Frontiers issue. I'll maybe put up some of my answers to the seed questions, but maybe in the interest of time, we'll save those for the discussion. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll conclude with a presentation from Maximilian Brill, which will be Nmap product validation and in-orbit mission cross-validation.
Hello, it's nice to see this nice development from the HYPERNet side. It helped us a lot for the Nmap validation, which is an integral part of the Nmap mission. And it's very valuable and important for cross-validation and especially also for homogenization of different sensor systems in the future. So, yeah, GFZ is responsible for the validation of the Nmap mission. And in general, we validated the L1B, the L1C, the L2A officially available data products. And we validated the radiometric, reflective, geometric, as well as the overall quality of the Nmap data products. Where we developed a bunch of different validation scenarios and algorithms. The green ones are mainly based on image-based algorithms, only using Nmap data, and the in situ data need, for example, in situ and reference data from HYPERNet or RADCALnet. And there's a mission quarterly report, which is publicly available on nmap.org to get inside the whole validation efforts here. So let's dive into some validation scenarios here. L1B, top of atmosphere validation. We use bottom of atmosphere reflectance from HYPERNet, RADCALnet. Also a lot of field teams supported us during commissioning and operational phase. And we propagate that to L1B top of atmosphere Nmap. And this is directly comparable. And we see in the 5% interval that for this nice matchup here, we are well inside the mission requirements. And we did that for the complete in-orbit phase for 36 validation matchups for different sites. A lot of supporters here, and if you go into the statistic, we have accuracy, precision, and certainty, RMSE, which is a mission requirement here. And for this 36 validation matchups, we are inside the 5%. For the whole range of radiance levels you see here in the histogram, they are not well balanced here. It would be nice to have a lot more brighter surfaces here to really stabilize the statistic here. And we filtered that for only the third year of the operational phase, only 6 valid matchups, and you clearly see that the statistic gets unstable, and the trend is not as well visible as before. If you have a look to the wavelengths dependent plots here, also for the 36 matchups, you clearly see that in the shorter wavelengths as well as in the longer wavelengths, we have higher uncertainties due to uncertainties in the in situ measurements, higher noise, and so on, lack of or AOT propagation issues. And if you filter that down to only the third year of operational phase here of Nmap, we clearly see a slight jump of the sphere sensor. However, statistic is not stable here. We have to integrate more in situ matchups to make really sure what the root cause is, and also ground segment is working already on it. L1B SNR, we also validated it, so the mean SNR calculated here for 93 tiles, we end up with an SNR of 410 to 1 for the 495 nanometer domain. So the most important plot is a purple plot, which is the SNR reference equivalence we calculated for this scenes over the whole wavelength range. And the same we did for the sphere for 70 tiles, the purple plot, and we end up with 2,200 nanometers. For 2,200 nanometers with 267 to 1 as an SNR. It's quite stable. The same is true for L1B spectral validation, which is made by Luis Guanta. Results here for 8 tiles. You have to make sure that the pre-processing versions as well as archived versions are already up to date. We acquired it for different atmospheric and angular conditions. We near 0.16 nanometer offset and a peak of 0.35 nanometer, which is also in the vision requirements of 20% for linear displacement of the detector, and that's also fulfilled for the sphere part where we have a peak of 0.6 nanometers for the SMILE. L1C absolute geometric is also important to cross-validate, but also to compare the different missions. There wasn't great improvement during operational phase. Absolute roundabout 11 meters. RMSE in X and Y, and linear sphere co-registration also improved a lot, also around 7 meters co-registration between linear sphere, well inside the mission requirements, and it's a really good starting point for the users to work on the data. So L2A, bottom of atmosphere validation land, is maybe one of the most important validation scenarios here. We used in situ data from field teams. We had a field guide to streamline the whole measurement process and compared them directly to the Nmap L2A products. In this case here, together with Ray Cockley. Really nice matchup here, and we did this for 47 valid matchups during the complete in-orbit period, and the requirements are reflectance level based, plotted here in red with red dots. And for the lower levels, we are slightly outside the mission requirements, but this is also due to fallback of AOT retrieval or in the AOT retrieval to a standard atmosphere here. And we also see that we don't have too many really high reflectance levels included in the statistic here. And if we filter that down to 3 matchups, the trend is also visible from the others. However, we have a look to the wavelengths dependent plot, then we clearly see that we have higher uncertainties, also shorter wavelengths and a little bit longer wavelengths, but also very close to 2%, which is a nice result for this 47 matchups here. If we filter that down, the wavelengths dependent plot, we see also a slight tendency to a jump in the sphere. However, the statistic is not so stable, so we need new in situ data to go into the statistic here to really unmask the systematic errors here. The overall annual conclusion, all the parameters are inside the mission requirements. The nice overview of the mission quarterly report is very helpful to get an idea of the data quality here. And yeah, so L1B, L2A cross-validation was a hot topic in the last months. I was not able to fulfill the whole validation here, but I started with a segmental comparison between Nmap, Prisma, and Emmet and tried to build up a global statistic. I used only matchups which were acquired by incidents and filtered them with a filter. 24 hours timely offset is not as good as needed for here. And the nice thing, or try to build up a global statistic here, only based on 7 matchup, only initial results. You have to take care of a lot of parameters, a lot of metadata handling, reflectance, definitions, and so on inside the different products. So L1B is for cross-validation the way to go from my point of view. And then there was an initiative between Prisma and Nmap to fill the archives with spatial, temporal, and Nadia matchups for cross-validation, which hopefully can be used by the different teams and users in the future, and also to generate transfer functions, example for time series densification. And yeah, coming to some conclusion, independent validation is crucial for the data quality. So we addressed a lot of issues in the data quality, which then were improved by ground segment, DLR, The more matchups, the better from my point of view or from our point of view, and it's essential to represent the entire range of the parameters. So balancing is very important. If you use only one site which has a certain characteristic during one acquisition situation, it will not give you the whole statistic. Also, if you include uncertainties, that would be the way to go in the future. It's important to have this balanced matchup data sources here. And coordination of cross matchups, including in situ data, is a big challenge. So we spend a lot of time to do that with Prisma, but for the other campaigns, it would be nice to improve that. And AI can be used. You have to be aware what you are doing for cross-Calval and harmonization issues in the future. There will be an upcoming paper of the results of the whole Nmap validation efforts here. And yeah, that will be my last talk. I changed my affiliation to Neo HySpecs, and there will be an open position at the GFZ for jumping into this nice job here and very important task here from my point of view. Please contact Sabine Chabrilla if you are interested in going further into this direction. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you. We can now open the discussion session. We have half an hour indeed to discuss all together and asking questions also to the speakers. Indeed, I invite all the audience to ask questions to all the speakers from this morning, both from Calval 1 and Calval 2 sessions. So let's take full benefit of this half an hour to have a good discussion all together. Is there any questions from the audience to the speakers or any point you want to raise? Comments? Yes, one over there.
Thank you. I have a question for I think it was the 5th presentation this morning, for the CHIME from the University of Zurich. Yeah, I was wondering, you explained about using the point spread function, but I did not really get did you use that for, to combine this overlay of the 3 images, or did you use it separately on each of them? That was not really clear for me. Maybe you can explain again. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. The point spread function was applied for every single mission and on every single mission separately. So if we looked at Everest NG, we used the point spread function on Everest. And for Prisma and Tessis as well, and applied it every time on the ground measurement and increased. And increased with this the uncertainty budget of the ground measurement.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
Hi, I have a question for Peter about the HyperNets, and the question is about the how to access the data, no? Because well, there are 2 questions. One is about accessing the data. I understand that you have to go through the website, then apply. So it's quite a manual data acquisition, and I was wondering if this kind of stuff can be automated through an API or something like this. That's the first question. And the second question is about the BRDF effects and the angular measurements from HyperNets. Not indeed, you change the inclination of the viewing, well, the inclination of the instrument, the viewing angle, and I just wonder when you want to combine all these different angular measurements to have a single reference reflectance data, what is the effect when you want to compare with another viewing instrument?
Thanks, Jorge. Both very relevant things to think about. And I think on both questions, we essentially have already some plans to address them. First, on the data distribution part, short term, it will be sort of a manual process through the website, but we are planning to develop an API, like a Python API to access the data. Again, probably providing the same functionality either with queries or monthly zip files. But that might still take a little while before that's available. On the second question on the BRDF, essentially there's a few things to unpack there. One important aspect, well, right now the only thing, or the best thing to do would be to essentially take the nearest viewing geometry to each measurement. So if you want to do a satellite validation, typically what we do currently is just pick the nearest one, or sometimes you can do an interpolation. But again, we do want in the future to actually look at fitting BRDF models for each of our sites and maybe add an additional HyperNets product, but that's still very speculative, let's say. That's not something that is already being developed except for GoBoLab. But it is, of course, a very important thing, and specifically also compared to the native products, it can really make a difference. And in a few cases as well, because we do have our deployment infrastructure, it could actually be that our nadir measurements derived from a full BRDF model might be better than the nadir measurements that we're currently including, because there might be some sort of field of view, a bit of shadow or a bit of the mast in the field of view, and so it's definitely something we want to explore. But right now we do have a HyperNets nadir measurement as well that can be used for direct comparison.
Yeah, we have more questions over there.
I have a question for Max. Great presentation, very comprehensive. I absolutely agree in the value of these inter-sensor comparisons. You mentioned the development of a radiometric transfer function to map one instrument to the other for densification of time series. An alternative that we've discussed would be to just use the independent products so that uncertainties could be propagated forward. I wonder if you have any thoughts on the relative merits of those approaches.
That would be also a way to go. At the end, then the user has to deal with the uncertainties. There are two different ways to solve that. So in the whole validation process, it was not so easy to deal with uncertainties, especially from the in situ field teams, but also from the Nmap mission. There was no uncertainty included, but in the future missions, it should be included. And for Prisma and Nmap, right now, transfer function could solve this lack of uncertainty prediction at that time, and to make sure that users can densify the time series, for example. But also, uncertainty prediction is the way to go. Then you can leave the data as it is, and you see what are the errors in it. Deal with it on the user side. Yeah.
And I think you were the next question.
So I guess this is a question to all the speakers. The CalVal sites are emphasize a nice uniform area for good reasons, but in reality, the point spread function of different bands may have different, so even if they're co-registered, co-centered, they may have different shapes. And so when we measure an actual scene with, let's say, shadows on all spatial scales, there will even, in that case, be a crosstalk from spatial contrast into your spectrum to create artifacts. And how could we get a handle on that using CalVal sites, for example, to have pattern layouts that try to capture these effects? If anyone have a thought on that.
Does one of the speakers wants to give it a shot and answer that question? There's a comment. Oh.
Okay, I think the question's about co-location of bands, but potentially it's much larger than that when we deal with the different size of the footprint for the in-situ measurement compared with the satellite data, which can be various resolutions. What we're doing in HyperNets is we're trying to characterize the spatial variability of the sites, looking at some higher resolution satellite data. So for some of them, we've used Sentinel-2 for some PlanetScope data to look at the uncertainty, to quantify the uncertainty associated with a small footprint and the larger satellite footprint. So I think it's not just co-registration, it's also the different sizes of the footprints.
Thank you very much. Is there another comment to this question? No? Then I think there was a question down here.
Just another follow-up question regarding this ground-based calibrations. Are there any tools around for the transformation of these directional measurements into hemispherical reflectances, or at least to wide sky HDRF values? Because you always have the problem with the sun position, and if you want to make it better comparable, you should provide also tools to transform it for better comparability.
I think that's a very good point, because of course it is very important that anytime we do any of these Cal-Val comparisons, we need to really be looking at exactly the same measurements. I mean, it cannot be compare apples and oranges. So we do have some tools currently internally available to do all that, and you need sort of direct diffuse irradiance ratios. You need to know your full BRDF model, and then you can calculate both the BRF and HCRF and look at the difference between them. These tools are currently not yet available open source. It is something we want to open source in the future, but the timelines on that is undefined.
There's enough, yeah.
I have a question for Regina regarding the MEAS instrument. It was about, did you make some measurements over actual glacier ice, so we have already an idea of how spectral they would look like once it reaches Europa?
Trying to avoid feedback there. So if we looked at what the spectra would look like at Europa, is that what you're asking? That is part of ongoing work, but we have a model basically that people have looked at for the potential for water plumes actually coming off of Europa. So that's something that one of the science team members has done, but there's more work to be done on kind of looking at how MISE will see things at Europa.
So just to follow up, actually the question was regarding if you measured glacier ice on Earth using MEAS instrument or like the prototype of it.
No, unfortunately, and MISE is actually like the coldest place on the Europa Clipper spacecraft, so we're not going to turn it on until it's after the Mars orbit on the way to Jupiter. So we won't get any chance to look at Earth, unlike JUICE did. So we won't get any Earth analog measurements, unfortunately. Yeah.
Are there any additional questions to the speakers, to the talk of the speakers?
Yeah, then we can move to the next part of the discussion session. As you might have seen, we are projecting 4 main bullet points. These are the seed questions that we have prepared for this session, and you might have noticed that some of the speakers had one last final slide with some of the answers related to these seed questions. Indeed, we asked the speakers to provide already some some answers to that, but now it's the opportunity to discuss all together about these points. Also, we had very little time to go through the answers of the speakers because, of course, there was not enough time. So it would be really great if also the speakers, but also the audience can expand on these 4 points so that we can discuss all together. So the first one is how many vicarious calibration sites might be needed worldwide to ensure accurate characterization of the radiances and reflectances, level 1B and level 2 products, returned by spectral imaging missions, and what are the core measurements that should be made at these sites and uncertainty performance requirements. So maybe some of the speakers want to start like expanding a bit on their answers that they provided before. And the audience, of course.
Yes, so what I noticed in the presentations that RadCalNet sites are used a lot. And there's a reason for that, because obviously the data is captured on an operational basis in a standard data format. It's easy to access. In terms of validating level 2 products, so surface reflectance, I don't think RadCalNet sites are ideal because they're not necessarily representing the targets that the applications are using, because obviously RadCalNet sites tend to be with very clear atmosphere, simple surface, usually non-vegetated. But a lot of the applications lie, for example, in vegetated areas with less clear atmosphere. So I'm wondering, yeah, what we can do about that and what implication that has on our ability at the moment to validate level 2 products.
Kevin wants to make a remark on that.
Peter can also answer this one. It's a good point. RadCalNet is clearly for vicarious calibration at the top of atmosphere, and HYPERNETS is for surface validation at the bottom of the atmosphere. And it's quite a different design of sites, because for RadCalNet you need to have something that's very horizontal, spatially homogeneous. For validation, you need to cover all vegetation types and situations where the users will want to use the data. So you need to deal with all the difficult cases, including spatial heterogeneity and different surface types. Peter, did I get everything? Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I will not add more to this, but will be different AOT. I mean, RadCalNet is not optimal, so to say, but they take AOT and water vapor measurement as well. It's not a lot. I mean, it's not always very clear atmospheres in some sites. And actually, I would like to thank also RadCalNet, because, for example, in GovaWeb, sometimes they take under some AOT and aerosols load conditions, and they maybe not produce TOA, but for the BOA is good. It's also, I totally agree that more surfaces are needed. But so in this, I will not add more. Also the extension. I mean, some sites, I don't know how big they have to be in order to have an homogeneous surface. Otherwise, the BRDF has to be characterized. AOT and water vapor has to be measured, and the uncertainty performance requirements, it really depends on the requirements of the mission, and I think has to be much smaller than the requirements they intend to validate. Otherwise, I don't see how mathematically it is possible.
Yes.
One comment with respect to the first question, how many vicarious calibration sites? I mean, as many as possible, certainly where I go with. So to leverage the community during the initial mission phase, some sort of organized, collective, worldwide collection of vicarious calibration sites for level 2 reflectance certainly seems what a lot of people are interested in doing kind of on an individual mission basis, and maybe collectively we could work to organize that. And we don't have to wait for 2030 or 2032. We could get together, organize that now, next year plan to measure 100 sites worldwide. Just putting that idea out there.
Thank you very much, Ray.
So let me offer, because we've heard several times that as many sites as possible is a valid answer there. So let's maybe rephrase that question as, what is the minimum number of sites required for accurate validation so that we can operate under a more resource-constrained model rather than thinking about infinite capacity?
I think maybe one comment on that would be, in addition to everything that was said before about the different surface types and so on, I think one thing that's also important is to have quite a good coverage in terms of latitudes, because of course, as the orbit progresses, there's different heating going on and so on. So I think that's also an important one. I would also state that, well, I think in addition to quantity is good, but I would argue that even more importantly is the quality of the reference sites. I think we need to have these sites really well characterized, both in spatial variability, in terms of its uncertainty budget of the instrument. So yeah, I think it's also worth investing in very good calibration sites as opposed to just many.
The comment here.
I might expound on that a little bit and ask, do we have the ability and tools now to ask the question across the types of products and domains of research coming out of imaging spectroscopy? Do we have a way to evaluate the range of accuracy requirements we have for different products, for different applications, and use that to also guide the selection of sites and the requirement for the minimum number of sites, but also at what level do we need to get the accuracy down for individual products or types of products? Say vegetation products that are going to models. There's a lot of uncertainties that get propagated, and maybe some of the lower level accuracies are less important than some other applications where it's much more important to have really highly accurate reflectances. And is there a Venn diagram or some other approach that we can identify optimal error budgets for different applications?
Yes, one comment here.
Hi. Of course, it would be better to have more of those validation sites, the more the better, I guess, but there are some limitations. But if we go one step further, for example, if we think who's using this data in the end. For example, modelers using the bottom of atmosphere reflectance, and they are mainly doing or producing simulations for different plant functional types. So I think from this perspective, it would be good to have validation sites that cover the main plant functional types, because in the end, the modelers also have to provide uncertainties in their simulations, and then they need the information of the validated input data, which is mainly the top of canopy reflectance data.
Thank you. Is there, yes, another comment there?
Thank you. Yes, to go on with this last comment, I think that the collocation of CalVal site for level 1 and level 2 products validation can be planned for the sites for which long-term existing biophysical parameters have been collected by other communities. So maybe the collocation of CalVal satellite sites nearby, I don't know, LTR, NEON, those networks may enable the validation of higher value products.
Thank you very much. Is there, yes, one last comment maybe to this question?
I think there is also something important that I think the Cal and the Val sites we should remember that they don't need to be the same, because they really need to serve different purposes. So I see the need for a lot of several validation sites across biomes and illumination condition and humidity condition and all possible targets and whatnot. But for the calibration purposes, I think we are looking for some really, or at least for the radiometric calibration, we should really pay attention to the stability across the surface. And this is obviously true for the emerged part of the Earth, but also it applies to the ocean part, which is not been talked about in the last day or so.
Thank you very much. Maybe one last comment to this question, and then, yes, Ayal.
Okay, I'm actually advocate Ray's idea to have a community that is measuring as much as possible CalVal sites. But what is important is that all these CalVal sites will be harmonized together. And this is in order to do cross-calibration, not to bring the sensor to one place. I suggest to bring one sample to all the places, one sample that we all agree. So I think if we will manage to formulate or to generate this kind of group in our community, all kind of questions will be raised and we will be able to solve them for the CalVal site measurement, that we will be all together, understand and agree that it is harmonized.
Thank you very much. So, to be honest, we are already at the end of our discussion now, very close. So I suggest to not dig into the other questions now, but I'm very confident that there will be enough time to discuss and a lot of comments from you also this afternoon for the breakout sessions. And with that, I want to thank again you as the chairs, also the speakers, all the commenters, and then we will continue seamlessly with the next session, the open science discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So if the chairs for the next session could come please to the desks. So this is basically the only session without a coffee break before, just to mention it. Nevertheless, we made it in time for the session of the challenges for the open science developments. Vera Krieger and Regina Eckert will guide you through this session. And yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And just to get started here, first of all, Jeff Dozier was part of the organizing committee for this. When of course we're missing him today. We have some cards. So Nicholas and I have some cards if anyone wants to sign a card for Jeff, telling him how much we wish he was here and hope he gets better soon. Second of all, we're going to go very quickly through a few talks. So they're 5-minute talks each, and then we're really hoping for a good discussion. We're hoping to have everyone talk in the audience, and then we'll kind of have a report out, and then obviously there'll be more discussion later this afternoon. So that's a little bit of an overview of the next hour. Hopefully everyone can get pepped up before lunch. So, all right. With that, maybe do you want to?
Yeah. So our first speaker is Jean-Baptiste Ferret, and he will talk about preparing access and use of global imaging spectroscopy data through cloud-based systems for forest monitoring. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. So, hi everybody, I'm Jean-Baptiste Ferret, so I will try to respect the 5 minutes timing. Okay, so here I will show you some work we've been doing with my lab. It's more an experience on Sentinel-2 data, but what I want to show you here is that maybe we can gain experience from what we've been through with Sentinel-2 in order to make data access and processing easier for future and current hyperspectral missions. So it will be 4 parts. I will go straight to the point. Oh yeah, okay, we can see it here. So basically, the context of this study is we try to answer to the question, how can we efficiently map and monitor ecosystem extent and biodiversity using satellite Earth observation? This comes from CEO's ecosystem extent task team, which had an objective to develop demonstrators based on various sensors and data cubes. So with my lab, we decided to go for a demonstrator for tropical forest monitoring and to map forest types over Costa Rica. And so basically, we want to understand a certain number of information conservation potential for secondary forests, for example. And there are a certain number of challenges for operational ecosystem extent and diversity mapping, which include accessibility to Earth observation time series, the use of cloud resources for high-performance computing and storage for optimal access and processing capacity at region and country scale, and the use of free and open softwares, methods, and data for reproducibility and dissemination. So we had broader objectives like collaborative Earth observation data processing and reproducibility, as I said, effortless transition from research and prototype to operational application and production, which is something we have been asked during the past years a lot. Easier integration of multi-sensor analysis, preparation of future satellite missions, and also what we want to do is save time and money for public data providers, developers, and users. So I will go through the context of Costa Rica very briefly. So it's interesting because it's a hotspot of biodiversity with ecological transitions in the 90s. And we have a bunch of topographic and climatic gradients. So, and we also have ground information from our local partners. So here what we wanted to do is to use a toolbox made of 3 components from data catalogs to applications in order to produce, well, some operational applications. So here you can see a list of, well, different logos corresponding to all the different tools we've been using to access catalogs, process data, perform quality control, ensure the deployment, use public APIs, and then perform applications. So we've been using different types of methods. We've been applying different types of methods with this data infrastructure. So one of them is BiodiVMapper. It's a method that we've been developing in order to produce diversity maps over forest using optical data. So first results, because I only have 1 minute left. So basically, here we used satellite image time series analysis and processing in order to produce cloudless satellite image spectral indices. Sorry. Then we applied BiodiVMapper on the spectral indices in order to map alpha and beta spectral diversity, and then we compared it with forest diversity. So here you have a view of Costa Rica, and basically here what we did was, oops, okay. We produced these alpha and beta diversity maps corresponding to species richness and species community distribution over the country. And then we are on the, our current task is to compare it to ground information. So here in the middle part, you have an overview of different types of forest. So first analysis showed that our diversity maps are relatively consistent with what we expected, and we are going further with specific ground validation with forest inventories. So it's a proof of concept, so this takes a few hours to produce over 1 country, so it works relatively well. And so the conclusions here is that, so we develop a cloud-based infrastructure based on free softwares, oops, I'm done, in order to run Earth observation applications with Sentinel-2 data. So what's very important here is that we've been using standard data format. So it's a stack format that some of you may be familiar with, which is really key in order to have a very efficient process. So it's all about free and open softwares in order to have efficient methods development and upscaling. So we use geospatial standards we should enhance capacity to integrate data from CHIME and SBG, for example. And so I didn't mention it, but we've been using Microsoft Planetary so far. And so the European Space Agency is producing so their own stack catalog, but it's not functional at the moment. And just one quick overview of, so using this tool, we could highlight problems with directional effects, for example, over French Guiana here. And in a matter of days, we were able to, produce a correction method, apply it, and produce a new version of our data. So it's really a very useful platform to really go straight to the point and implement method over large scales. And so, well, we have a few contributions for the questions that we will discuss about at the end of the presentation, at the end of the session. Thank you. I hope I was not too long.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so our next speaker is Yves Gouvet, and he will tell us something about simulating hyperspectral radiometric calibration reference over bright desert targets.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. I'm Vincent Leroy, and these are my colleagues at Reference. I changed a bit the scope of my talk to match better the scope of the session. And so I'm going to talk about hyperspectral simulation with the open source radiative transfer model Irradiate. And I'm going to exemplify the features we've been working on since a while now to support hyperspectral workflows with the result of a scientific study where we compare, where we assess the effect of how you build the atmospheric profile you use when you perform radiative transfer simulation in the context of Earth observation. So usually when you will configure your simulation, you will start by picking one of these profiles. So these are, we'll call them standard. And they were designed in the 1980s. So it's a while ago. And when you, so they provide static values for pressure, temperature, and molecular species concentrations as the function of altitude. And so if you look at the data, you can see that for like typically methane and CO2 concentrations, it's quite different from what it's now. So usually I mean, not always, but often it's not that much of a concern because for a lot of sensors, the bands are positioned in atmospheric windows where molecular absorption will play a minor role, and so won't have too much of an effect on the outcome of your simulations. But with hyperspectral simulations, you have to deal with all spectral intervals, including the difficult ones. And so at this point, it's worth asking ourselves the question, how good are we when we are not in an atmospheric window? Because, well, we are going to have to calibrate instruments and do other tasks in these regions as well. So to do this, we compare two different methods to build atmospheric profiles. One which we will call the conventional one, in which we use one of these profiles and we rescale, so we adjust, we correct some atmospheric species concentrations with some more current data. And another one, which we will call the realistic one, where we generate a custom atmospheric profile of pressure, temperature, and molecular species concentrations based on CAMS data, chemistry analysis data taken at the point and time on the location and time of the observation we are simulating. So in this study, we took 27 PRISMA observations over the Libya 4 calibration sites. It's a desert site. And we simulated the top of atmosphere reflectance, and we checked, we looked at the relative difference there is between the mean simulated top of atmosphere VRF in both approaches. And so this is what you have in the middle panel of this slide with a 5% threshold of the difference. And we can see that we exceed it very easily when we get outside of the atmospheric windows. And if you make your requirements stricter for instance, to match the radiometric requirements of the best instruments that are that we should see live soon, it's even worse. Then we can maybe see where it's difficult, and so we can take a look at what the relative difference versus molecular transmittance plot looks like, and we can clearly see that there's a trend. So this allows us to categorize the different spectral regions in the atmosphere, and then this can serve as some sort of a guideline on how deep we should go in the atmospheric profile modeling. So in green, you have the regions where the transmittance is above 97%, and so basically it doesn't make a much difference whether approach you use. In yellow, you have more of a transitional region where, depending on your accuracy requirement, you should pick the realistic or the conventional approach is enough. And in red, whatever you, it's where the transmittance is below 75%, and there, if you want to be better than 5% accurate, you need to use the realistic profile. This is just an example. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to finish. It's just an example. Irradiate is applicable to other use cases, and in particular, proper hyperspectral imaging. It's a 3D Monte Carlo ray tracing model. It's free and open source software. If you want to know more, you can visit our website or talk to me. And yeah, these are like preliminary answers. I didn't have much time to write this, so then I will be happy to contribute more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, next we'll have Sabine Chaberlet talk about NMAP hyperspectral open science.
Okay, I will say next. It's okay? Yeah. Hi, I'm happy to represent, to take my second hat and represent open science in the NMAP science program today. Can you stay on the first slide, maybe? Yeah, and I would like to thank my partner in the NMAP project PI, so which are all the GFZ NMAP team, but then at the Humboldt University, at the LMU, Ludwig Maximilian University, and at the AVI, and of course the DLR. So next slide, please. Yeah, so you have heard a lot about NMAP, so I don't go too much. I'm here, I represent the user perspective, so I think it's interesting to look at the user maps of NMAP. So one point in NMAP is that since this year, in terms of new users, we have as many users in Europe and as many users outside Europe. So this is really what I call a global mission. And we have a very strong demand for NMAP areas. You all know that in some areas, like Europe, we even have too many domains. And so we have this large user community that we have to fill in, and also we have a very extensive science program through the years. So next slide. Just a quick show. As you know, high data quality is important, does reflect in high results quality. So I just like very quick on this, I think CalVal is super important because this is the basis for this at the end. And sincerely, I believe that we still have new things or new applications that we will discover from the analysis of dynamic space-bound hyperspectral data. That is really just beginning right now. Next slide, please. Yeah, so what about the NMAP science program after the first year, after the launch? We are very happy that finally it is still maintained, obviously switching to operational mode, so much more reduced compared to pre-launch. So we have a focus on mission support. Of course, this is our main role in the NMAP mission. We define a background and foreground mission. We are responsible for reviews and recommendations to the board. We are responsible for external validation. That was the talk of Max. Next slide. Next. So we have responsible of demonstration of scientific achievements. She's running very well. And what is this talk about? Maintenance and developments of open source algorithms. We have our two big programs, Mapbox and HYPERSPECTRAL, that I think everyone knows in this room. Those are more than 10 years of development, so those are not things that come from one year to the next. And basically, we are looking at releasing new resources. Next slide. Yeah, and as I said, I acknowledge the partners and our funding agency here. Next slide. Yes, so Mapbox, as I said, I think all of you know about it. I encourage you to go see the poster. So now we are in the Mapbox version 3.15. It's a QGIS, supported on QGIS. It's a Python tool. It's based on free and open source. So we kind of looked at the FAIR definitions, and Mapbox fulfills the FAIR requirement. Mostly, I would say, except in a few specific softwares that because of metadata, structures, and all that are specific to Nmap. But except for this, I think in the past 10 years, Mapbox has been a tool developed for Nmap, but actually useful for all the imaging spectroscopy mission. Next slide. Just to say, just a few applications that are in Mapbox. We are now looking at developing new, or let's say, up-to-date, or implementing some key feature, like right now AI or hybrid approach from the LMU. There is a poster. There's another poster on the Nmap pre-processing tool where we are implementing ISOFIT currently. And just something I would like to mention, if you can click, next slide. The ROSX tools for co-registration that was made years ago. I noticed this year at ERSL and at this conference, all the people who began to work on time series, HYPERSPECTRAL, use ROSX. So sometimes you make a software and later it's much more used than what you think. Next slide. HYPERSPECTRAL also not have to be presented. I think Nmap is the only mission that do this type of activities. I think it's super important, and we have a huge response and huge user demand. Next slide, I'm a bit rushing through. So in the past 3 years, we developed those MOOCs, those massive open online courses. Those are a huge propaganda for the mission and also huge user response. Next click. And in the next, in the next funding period, we are planning to develop 3 new ones. So you can go to the conclusion, thank you. So as open science, I would say it benefits to the mission, so it is useful for the mission itself. It benefits to the whole imaging spectroscopy community. It supports the synergies and collaborations between the missions. We did also screenshots for Prisma data access. It supports the provisions of test bench data sets. It supports key long-term objectives. The FAIR principles are mostly respected, or let's say we try to, whenever possible. It's not always possible. Next click. Challenges, many challenges. There is no glory in documentation. No funder will ever accept to fund one position for updating, maintenance, and documentation. But it is actually an essential part of it. Just to place it, open science takes more time. You also cannot ask a PhD to publish his software. He does not have time. He does not have 3 months to waste on putting a DOE for his software publication. So you do have also to have dedicated programs for this. It just does not come on a typical research science projects, and it has to be long-term. So 2 things that we see, especially with HYPERSPECTRAL and Mapbox, is the PR aspect, like workshops, webinars. Basically, we have a huge user demand. We have to do more and more, but this also requires time and cost, and the continuity. All these things have to be really updated regularly and maintained. So, yeah, common guidelines is a challenge. Common platforms would be a wish. I'm not sure we achieve this one, but okay. And benchmark data sets, we see in general a bottleneck for sharing the in-situ data in our data publications. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And then next we have Jorge Vicente Severo talking about physics-aware emulators for atmospheric correction. And then also, if the clicker ran off in someone's pocket, if you could bring it back down, or maybe it's here, I don't know.
Hi, good morning. So I'm Jorge Vicente Cervera and will present some work that I'm doing at the Image and Signal Processing Group at University of Valencia on the physics-aware emulators for atmospheric correction. So yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so just a small slide for the background. So atmospheric emulators and atmospheric RTM, so atmospheric transfer models. Well, you know that there are these codes that they are used widely to generate or to propagate the signal through the atmosphere and has applications both in atmospheric correction, sensor calibration, sensor design, and so on. Well, these tools are rather complex. They are accurate but slow for operational data processing. So typically, what we want to do is to apply a lookup table interpolation to overcome these challenges from the slow computing time of RTMs. Still, now I think for hyperspectral data, these lookup tables are increasing on size. There are more demands on being more spectrally resolved, and the accuracy of the spectral of the atmospheric correction also demands very large lookup tables. And this is a problem that we are facing also for Flex specifically. Of course, this comes at expenses as well of larger runtimes and also memory usage for the lookup tables and the exploitation of those lookup tables. So we normally apply some tailored approaches every time to specific targets of data processing. So an emulator basically it's an alternative to the traditional lookup table interpolation approach based on statistical regression methods. And the idea is to build those lookup tables for the training data sets on a smaller number of samples, and then train a machine learning method to use as a predictor of the RTM simulation. So normally we need much lower samples. The speed is reasonably fast, and they are also highly accurate. However, the challenges of this approach is that they are kind of black boxes, so we don't know really what the machine learning is doing inside. We have just some hyperparameters that they are just fit to reproduce the best DRTM simulators. And the other challenges are still that they are still slow for multi-output spectral data, and they need for an optimization around the factor 5. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just a small slide about the general approach for emulation. Here I'm using Gaussian processes. So basically we have every atmospheric transfer functions on transmittance, path radiance, spherical albedo, and so on, that they are emulated independently. The multi-output spectral data is handled through PCA dimensionality reduction, so we cannot train one Gaussian process on every single spectral channel. So we apply first a dimensionality reduction, and then we train a GP on each of these PCA components. And then when we are doing the prediction, what we predict is those PCA components, and because we are storing the PCA transformation matrix, then we can come back to the original spectral data. So all the hyperparameters of the GPs and the PCA transformation is stored for later use. And well, on this approach, on this current implementation, the problem is that we have, let's say, of these black boxes problem. The PCA transformation kind of removes the information of the physical information of the data. We have the hyperparameters of the Gaussian processes that they are also adding more hidden information of the GPs. So the idea or the question is how to design explainable physics-aware machine learning for the emulation. So next slide, please. So on my current research, we are applying to two different methods. And here on this slide, I present the first one is about feature selection. Basically, what we want to do is to have an iterative process in which we are adding one new variable at a time on a GP emulator. So we are ranking them by order of importance. No? So we start adding the first variable of more importance among the variables of the input variables that we want. Once we select the most important variable, we then go to the next one, change all these variables to see which are the second one in order of importance, and so on. And then we are basically, what we are doing here is ranking these variables by this importance, and we characterize this importance. What we have here basically is, because we are ranking those, we can just cut at certain point or identify the variables that they are not playing absolutely any role on the emulation, on the prediction, and basically we just remove them. So this way we can speed up computation time, and we also understand basically we understand better what is the emulator, what is basically doing. Another thing is that because we are ranking those variables by order of importance, we can have a better explain better what is doing the emulator and weight better the information of each variable on the output of the prediction. And then also this ranking allows us to have a sensitivity analysis of the original radiative transfer model to know what is going on inside of the code. So basically, just these are two examples of this application here. On the first plot here, the colorful one is basically on every single wavelength. We can identify what is the relative importance of every single input variable on the model. And on the second plot is just so I basically all the four configurations is a different kind of emulator. So the blue curve is a classical Gaussian process with a Gaussian kernel, and the yellow one is an ARD kernel. But basically, when we apply feature selection, we can get these other emulations approaches on the red line and the purple line, which are kind of having a better explainability and reasonable accuracy. Next slide, please. So yeah, symbolic regression is something that I'm currently working. So this slide is going to be more theoretical, basically. The idea is like, okay, we have so far used the PCA idea to just make the dimensionality reduction. But okay, these PCA components, they basically don't mean anything, if you want. You cannot interpret them easily. So basically what we want to do is to replace this PCA dimensionality reduction by applying a semi-empirical linear transformation in which let's call the basis functions, these spectral features, they are interpretable. We can understand them as the transmittance of the water vapor, transmittance of different gases, smoothing component due to scattering of aerosols and molecules, and so on. So basically, we have a large collection of this kind of basis spectra, and now we have to use a selection method to choose which ones are these ones that they are actually impacting the model output. So for that, we are using Lasso to find the ideal components. Well, the idea or the ongoing work and the current challenges is like we want to apply also semi-parametric model as a first guess, or for example, using a single scattering approximation, and then refine this simple parametric model with a linear combination of these spectral features that are automatically identified through Lasso. So one of the first challenges here is also how to construct this spectral library, which is going to be large enough and representative enough of the physics of the problem. One of the challenges as well is the prediction accuracy. Of course, this is limited by the accuracy of the dimensionality reduction itself. So then we can apply some multi-fidelity methods to improve the accuracy beyond the explainability of the model. And of course, there's obviously the challenge of optimizing runtime for this multi-fidelity approach. I think with this I'm done. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah. Well, this is just the last slide with some references. Basically, all this research is being published. All the tools for generating the simulated data, they are also available, so you can access both the algorithms, both the tools for generating radiative transfer model simulations, and yeah, you can reach me out if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then Jorge will stay on stage because he's also going to talk about the ESA's Flex Data Innovation and Science Cluster. So a different side of open science.
Okay, so I don't need to introduce myself again. I'm just saying now that I'm now changing my hat. I'm working now for Magellan, a company in Toulouse. And this work is about the Flex Data Innovation and Science Cluster, DISC for short. Well, there's a list of almost 35 co-authors here, and and participants into the projects. You can see the logos of the institutions that are participating in the project, and you can imagine that managing this large project is it's a bit of a pain. Anyway, next slide, please. So, well, I'm glad that Marco already did the presentation about the FLEX mission, so I don't need to introduce you FLEX again. I will just go directly into the DISC activity. So the DISC activity stands for the Data Innovation and Science Cluster. Basically, the goal is to develop the ground segment for FLEX in a collaborative platform so that it can be used to involve future users in the exploitation of the FLEX data and collaborate with the implementation of future algorithms. What we want to do specifically is divided on this diagram here. Basically, we want to improve and industrialize the prototype processor for the level 2 algorithms into the current ground segment implementation. What we want to do as well is to develop this kind of collaborative platforms so that external users can access to the data, can also apply their own algorithms. Rather than bringing the data to the users, we bring the algorithms to the data. One important activity as well is to do the implementation of the CalVal. So all the planning of the CalVal, the activities of the CalVal, the execution of the CalVal tools, and the development of those, and the operations. An activity also carried out here is the quality monitoring of the data, developing all the tools, and do the actual operations of these tools to monitor the data once the satellite is in orbit. And then last but not least important point is to actually allow external users, not only the people within the project, but also future users, to contribute to the development of state-of-the-art algorithms and improve the science quality of the data and of the mission. Next slide, please. Okay, so the project is basically divided in four phases, and the total duration of the project is 6.5 years. We started a few months ago. I don't know, I lost track of time. 6 months, let's say. Okay, and yeah, this project has a very large team of collaborators. As I mentioned already, around 35 people are participating in the project. Each of us with our own expertise that we are bringing them all together to develop or to try to bring the best out of the FLEX data. So this implies or this involves scientific institutions doing the algorithm development, the design and the execution of the CalVal activities, the outreach of scientific outcomes of the FLEX mission, but also industrial partners that are also contributing to the building of the ground segment, all the industrialization of the CalVal tools and the quality control tools, the quality monitoring operations, and so on. So you can see here the 4 phases of the project. We are currently on the first phase, on the development, 21 months of activity. Basically here we are industrializing the level 2 prototype processor. We are starting with the development of the quality control tools, the CalVal tools, preparation of the collaborative platform, designing the CalVal strategies, and so on. Then after this 25 months of development, we are going to move to the 10th month phase of preparation. Basically here we want to finish all the technical and scientific activities and to leave the software, let's say, and the activities, the CalVal tools and quality control tools ready for the commissioning phase and to prepare for the commissioning. Well, commissioning itself is the 3rd phase. It's only 3 months of activity, classical activity. So the disk will support ESA on the commissioning phase. We will do the data collection, the quality control analysis, the CalVal analysis, and so on. And then once it moves through the commissioning, we will just go to the operation phase, or the larger phase, 3.5 years, in which we are going to do the routine operations of the satellite and the analysis of the data more, again, in a routine operations. The idea also in this phase is to allow external scientists to participate on the evolution of the algorithm. So this is not a box that you cannot contribute. The idea is that at some point also you can access the data and implement your own algorithms within this collaborative platform, and of course doing activities about outreach. We can move to the next slide, please. Okay, this is just a view, a more detailed view of the first phase. We are currently on the milestone 2 that we just had a couple of days ago, basically. Basically we have now a first version of the level 2 prototype processor. So this is the green line after the phase of design. We are starting with the let's say version 0 of the actual ground segment, the instrument processing facility. For the moment, these are just tabs to have a general view of the architecture of the system for the future industrialization of the algorithms. We are also going through the plan definition for the quality control tools and the CalVal with a preliminary design of these tools. And and we are now going to move into the milestone 3 soon. So we are gonna keep improving on the algorithms towards the version 2 of the level 2 prototype processor and having a first version of the industrialized version of this prototype processor. The idea is also for the milestone 3 is that we have already a first version of the CalVal tools and the quality control tools with more consolidated plans for the use of those tools and the CalVal plan. So I think we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, this is an overview without going much in details, hopefully, about the current data processing. So in the disk, we are developing the processor for the level 1C and level 2 products. So the level 1C basically it ingests the level 1B data coming from OLTI and SLSTR on the Sentinel-3 platform. And we are merging the data together with the Flex data. So Flex level 1B is separated into 2 different spectrometers, well, actually 3. So 2 high-resolution spectrometers on the oxygen bands, A and B, and then 1 low-resolution spectrometers covering roughly 500 to 750 nanometers. So all this data, then they have to be harmonized together and put it together in a common reference frame so that it's easier to use for users. The idea is to merge all together to the common reference frame of the Floris high-resolution spectrometer and merge the different spectrometers from Floris into one single spectrum. The level 1C data, the main product is the main variable in the level 1C product is basically calibrated top of atmosphere radiances with obviously appended information in terms of geometry, spectral geometric characteristics, and also meteorological data. On the figure here, you can basically see a very high-level overview of the data processing. What we have is we ingest the level 1C, the level 1B radiances. We do the merging, and these are going later on. Once everything harmonized, we go to the level 2A module, which is in charge of characterizing the atmosphere. So for this, we are using SLSTR data, OLTI, and Floris data to retrieve atmospheric characteristics, water vapor, aerosols, and so on, derive atmospheric surface reflectance, and then go into the level 1B module, doing the fluorescence retrieval, biophysics, and then level 2C module doing the retrieval of biophysical parameters and the photosynthesis related products. And then once we have all these products, all of them in the Floris high resolution spectral frame, we just make the auto-rectification of this product into UTM tiles using the Sentinel-2 tiling. I'm not going to go into the details. You have a list of the level 2, expected level 2 products. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is a small slide about that one of the scientific activities that we are obviously doing is a part of the CalVal. So I'm not going to go into the details, but basically all of the partners in the project, they are determining which are the ideal sites to do the calibration of the various products or variables inside of the level 2 product, doing the conception of the validation protocols, the algorithms for doing the calibration, the upscaling, and so on, testing some tools, identifying the necessary test data sets, and so on. So this is just for illustration purposes. Yeah, I think with this I'm done. Next slide, maybe. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. I think first off, we'll start with some Q&A, and while if anyone has any questions for the speakers, please raise your hand and we'll get you a mic. But while we're doing that, and people are thinking of their questions, I think just to give a little bit of backwards context for this session, what you just heard was like kind of a smattering of things from across the open science spectrum. So when we were putting this together, we were thinking about all the different aspects of open science. So that includes people who are actually doing things that are being open. And so you heard talks from people who are on the forefront of that. And then also people working on doing collaboration and education, and people working on kind of building data systems for people to use and working on standards or exhibiting how to implement those standards. So there's lots of different pieces of open science, and that's what we wanted to kind of get a cross-cutting view at here. So I'll pause and see, does anyone have any questions for any of our speakers? They say, no, it's lunchtime. All right, well, if you have any questions for the speakers, you can ask them later, but I think before we release you for lunch, I do want to make you talk about open science for a little bit. So I think if we could just take 5 minutes and everyone talk to people in your immediate vicinity. I think open science is something, again, that really applies across a lot of different areas. So if you can think about your area, whether that's more Cal-Val, whether that's like vegetation, applications, whether that's radiative transfer, what are some of the kind of promises? What are the things that open science can really bring us? So for example, in Cal-Val, we were just talking about how having something that's really available across, agencies can be really useful for everybody. That's one promise. But what are also the challenges? So maybe we can just take 5 minutes and everyone can talk about that, and then we'll go around and force people to tell us about it. So, all right, take 5 minutes, meet someone new or meet someone you already know. Thanks.
Well, let's see if this will work out. And just a reminder, we will take the group pictures in a couple of minutes, so don't disappear somewhere for lunch yet, because we need to take the group picture before the lunch. Thank you.
All right, excellent. I know that wasn't very long, but we do want to get a few inputs here. So maybe we can get some group from this section. Can someone raise their hand? Do you want to share what you talked about? What's a promise? What's a challenge?
Yes.
Sorry first about the clicker. Indeed, I left it and just right under the mic and people just didn't see it. I didn't want to interrupt, so apologies. I just would actually like to because I didn't have time to read my questions, my reactions. I'm speaking just for my part of the Calval chain, which is just radiometric calibration. We do a lot of relative transfer modeling. And one of the issues there is that the models we have available in the community, and actually I think also this relates to what Sabine said. She said it all basically. But it's software that's been produced by research groups, not necessarily software engineers, that are not necessarily maintained anymore. So this is, for me, a big issue because this is, in a sense, critical software. And there is not enough resources allocated to maintaining it and to also upgrading it. And so the most simple systems, you can take the code, it's 30 years old, but there are compilers that will work, it's fine. If you take a more complex software like Libratron already, if you don't maintain it over time, you will have issues. And if you take the thing we are doing, I mean, Irradiate is open source, but it's a very complex system. And so if you don't allocate specifically resources to maintain this, at some point it just stops working and nobody can use it anymore. So yeah, just to say that I very much agree with what Sabine said. We need dedicated resources to maintain these tools and to recognize that they are critical facilities. They are not just pieces of software, they are facilities. In a lab, you have technicians paid to operate a facility, and we should have the same attitude towards the software.
It's an excellent point. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's go. Someone in the middle section. Thank you.
We also had discussions about this maintenance and who's in the know-how of maintaining these tools and collaborating more with software developers. As one of the presenters said, it's not really the job of like PhD students to make these tools. And then we also had a nice discussion about who are the users of these tools. We often talk about these products going towards application decisions or larger decision making and policy, but we didn't really, I feel like we were talking a little bit to ourselves here, a little bit to the science users, and getting more feedback and input from them and incorporating those feedback into building these tools, I think would be really useful.
Excellent. That's a great point. All right, first section over here, or last section, I guess. Left section. Anyone? Anyone have anything interesting to share about open science, thoughts about challenges, or thank you?
Well, I would like to piggyback on the previous comment, not just about PhDs, but if you look around this room, we have a very westernized and white discussion here. So I guess what we have to become better on is including the Global South in all those discussions, which is a real challenge.
Yeah, thank you for this comment. I think one way forward to this is to become active in the CEOs working groups, because they are internationally active. And now we want to do a mood picture with you, not how much you are starving. We don't want to know that, but maybe to get agile for the group photo, you want to come down and you want to place yourself between 0, where Regina is, and 10. What do you think? Where do you stand with your science in terms of open science? So if you think like, I'm not really doing open science, then you go through that direction. And if you think like, I'm very much into open science direction, then you come closer to me and you can place yourself in between here, like a Mentimeter. So.
No split, no split. At this point, I come upstairs with you. In between, in between, in between.
Yeah, true.
Ecco che qua presente per la prova.
Il punto di piedi, vedi, parte Giacomo qua.